down whenever you and the team are ready. And good morning to you all.
Okay, we are ready to go in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Good morning. I am Kenyon McDuffie, council member for Ward 5 and chair of the council's committee on business and economic development. Today is Tuesday, December 13th, 2022, and we're convening this hearing virtually via Zoom. It's being streamed live on the council's website as well as on KenyonMcDuffieWard5.com/live. The time is 9 a.m. And I'm calling to order this public hearing. Today, the committee will consider one measure, Bill 24-1063, the Sports Wagering and Fair Competition Amendment Act of 2022. As a reminder, public witnesses will have 3 minutes each to provide oral testimony. Witnesses will be promoted to panelists when they're called to speak, at which point they'll be able to turn on their cameras and microphones. I ask that all participants mute their microphones and keep their cameras off when they're not speaking. Bill 24-1063 was introduced on October 24th, 2022 by council members Alyssa Silverman, Charles Allen, Mary Che, and Brooke Pinto. It was referred to the Committee on Business and Economic Development on November 1st, 2022. Currently, the district runs its own sports wagering sports books, Gambit DC. Wagers made with Gambit DC can be made in person and at retail locations, as well as online and through the Gambit DC mobile app. Third parties can also be licensed to participate in sports wagering through 2 license categories. Class A licenses are more expensive and are issued for retail locations located with legally defined sports venues. That is to say, Capital One Arena, Audi Field, National Park, and St. Elizabeth East. Wagers are placed in person at those locations and can also be placed online, but also with a 2-block radius surrounding the retail location. Class B operator licenses are granted to retailers throughout the District of Columbia, but those operators cannot be located within a 2-block radius of a Class A facility. All wagers placed with Class B operators must be placed at the retail facility. As introduced, this measure would expand online and mobile sports wagering in the District of Columbia by licensing third-party online and mobile providers to accept sports wagers throughout the District of Columbia through the creation of a new Class C license. The application fee for this license would be $1 million, and Class C licensees would be taxed at 15%, which would be the amount of their revenue transferred to the district. Among other clarifications, the bill would also require the district to terminate and prohibit the exercising of any extension option of its existing contract for the provision of Gambit DC and iLottery when that contract expires in 2024. Since the launch of legal sports wagering in the district, the program has experienced issues with district-run Gambit DC mobile app, both operational issues and problems with user experience. In addition, revenue generated following the initial launch of the program failed to meet projections. This experience has prompted lively and ongoing debate on how to improve the district-run mobile sports wagering program. Today, we're going to hear from public witnesses ranging from consumer protection and responsible gambling advocates to small business owners participating in the existing program, as well as industry representatives, their thoughts on this proposal. Also hope to elicit proposals or suggestions that may not be included in this legislation. Before we get started with public witness testimony, I want to make a quick note about scheduling. If this hearing does not conclude by 11 a.m., which it probably won't, I'm going to recess the hearing until 12:15. Quite a few public witnesses have dedicated time out of their day to testify on this matter, and it's important to ensure that they are all heard and have the opportunity to respond to questions. I also want to devote adequate time to our government witness. A brief recess is necessary so that I can participate in the council's business that's going to occur at 11 a.m. this morning, and a previously scheduled committee markup of this committee as well, without having to rush through the hearing on this measure. So I appreciate everyone's cooperation and patience should a recess be necessary. With that, I'm going to turn first to see if any of my colleagues are on this morning. I do not see any council members, and so we're going to turn to our first panel of public witnesses. Actually, I do see one of my colleagues. Good morning. Ward 3 council member and member of this committee, Mary Chey. Thanks for joining us.
Morning.
We turn to you for an opening statement.
Well, thank you very much. And I really feel almost compelled to make this statement today. Like a lot of other people, I've been very disappointed in the way sports betting has played out here in the district. Revenues have been well below expectations. Gambit DC, our sole mobile sports betting app, brought in 2.7 million in fiscal 22. That's 10% of the 27 million that was projected for 22 in the fiscal impact statement for the bill back in 2018. Last year, the app lost us 4 million, and the app had a high profile embarrassments like crash during the Super Bowl, the 22 Super Bowl, the biggest sporting event of the year. Here it comes. I hate to say I told you so, but I told you so. I opposed this contract from the beginning. I said back in 2019 that awarding a contract for exclusive control over mobile sports betting was a mistake. I also raised doubts about the projected revenue under the contract, and look at where we are now. We could have gone in another direction and allowed for competition in the area and then taxed the profits made by the competing app vendors. But the council was taken with the idea that this was a special case warranting a sole source contract. And it's time for us to admit that that was wrong and revisit the whole system. There are a number of successful betting apps in other jurisdictions. No reason for us to continue pouring money into a failing one. And not only was the basis for the sole source contract wrong, not only were the predictions of the revenue dramatically off the mark, but there were multiple subcontracts to individuals with little or no experience in providing services related to sports wagering. They had, however, extensive political connections, and most troubling, were themselves lobbying the district for the system that we set up in the manner that it is now going to benefit or has benefited them financially. We knew all this. You had my dear colleague's letter, but with great cynicism, we said, no, that's okay. That's the way it is. And I'm still disgusted by all of that. So I appreciate Councilmember Silverman bringing this bill. I'm a co-introducer and pleased to be so. The bill would correct our mistake by preventing an extension of the disastrous contract with Intralot that expires in 2024 and opening the district to a competitive market for mobile sports betting apps with licensed betting apps paying taxes on their revenue. And I agree with Councilmember Silverman on this. If we're going to have sports betting apps, we should have ones that work. Taxpayers deserve no less. They also deserve a transparent, competitive bidding process. And I'm hopeful that this bill will provide all of those things. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember Chey. We're going to go to our panel of public witnesses, and staff may have to help me out here. I'm going to call the names that as they appear on the witness list. And when you hear your name called, you can, actually, I think we see David Groman, who's the Senior VP, U.S. Retail Operations with Caesars Sportsbook. And we call maybe the first half or so of those witnesses. We can start with David Groman, and good morning to you. Thanks for joining the committee this morning. You can begin your testimony. You're going to have 3 minutes to do so.
Great. Thank you, Chairman McDuffie. Good morning, Chairman McDuffie and members of the committee. I am David Groman, Senior Vice President and Chief Retail Sportsbook Officer for Caesars Sportsbook, which is part of Caesars Entertainment. And I'd like to thank everyone for the opportunity to speak this morning. Today, I'm going to tell you about our investments in the district, the local jobs we've created, and the economic activity we've helped generate under the current sports betting framework. I've actually been a witness to sports betting in DC from the very beginning, and Caesars signed our first of a kind agreement with Monumental Sports and Entertainment in 2019 to develop a world-class sportsbook, bar, and restaurant at Capital One Arena. We managed to build this space, 20,000 square feet, during the most difficult times of COVID in 2020, working closely with the Office of Lottery and Gaming, the DC Office of Small and Local Business Development, other local businesses, and Monumental Sports and Entertainment. Relying on the current sports betting framework, Caesars has invested more than $10 million in direct capital improvements at Capital One Arena. which is now recognized as having one of the best and most successful sports books in the country. And we didn't stop investing in the arena when it first opened. We actually launched our mobile app, which can be used for wagering within the arena, and the designated area surrounding it is permitted by DC law. And then earlier this year, to meet customer demand, we actually made an additional $500,000 in improvement to expand the sports book into an underutilized space in the arena box office, which added additional self-service kiosks for wagering. We opened the sports book to great demand, while most other businesses were shut down in the district. And we continue to help bring visitation to the Chinatown Gallery Place area 7 days a week, even when there are not live sporting events and concerts at the arena. Unfortunately, many businesses in the area surrounding the sportsbook remain closed or have closed permanently. But our sportsbook continues to be successful and has taken more than 3 million individual bets over the counter through kiosks and our mobile app. I'd like to thank the entire OLG staff for their assistance in getting us up and running. Since opening the sportsbook, Caesars has contributed nearly $6.5 million in tax revenue and license fees to the district. We've created more than 130 jobs through a combination of the sportsbook and our Guy Fieri's downtown kitchen and bar in the same location. Our food and beverage employees are members of Unite Here, Local 23, and of our 130 active positions, 81% are African American, and more than 2/3 are DC restaurants. The average sportsbook job pays nearly $50,000 a year. Creating unlimited Class C mobile licenses in a relatively small jurisdiction like DC will result in the loss of many jobs at Capital One Arena and other sports betting operations in the district. Additionally, a key part of unique DC sports betting legislation is to drive local business participation and mentorship to certified business enterprises. To this end, Caesars has spent more than $3 million with CBEs that provide many important services to our sportsbook, our restaurant, and those include security, surveillance, cleaning, and printing. In a moment, you'll hear from a CBS success story that shows how the current law works as intended. We have a partnership with the CBE, Infinity Solutions, which provides surveillance services for us, not just in
Mr. Gorman, if you can summarize your testimony, your time has expired.
Yes, sir. In closing, we believe the current framework for sports betting works, creates jobs, grows businesses, and encourages investment while still having healthy competition amongst the operators and ample opportunities for sports betting customers. And I'd like to thank you, Chairman Duffy, for the time.
And thank you for your testimony this morning. We're going to go next to Brianne Durashwolo with the National Council on Problem Gambling. Good morning to you. Thank you so much for being here. You can begin your testimony. You have 3 minutes.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman McDuffie and members of the committee. I'd like to thank you for this opportunity to testify today. As the chairman said, my name is Brianne Dora-Shawal, and I represent the National Council on Problem Gambling, or NCPG. We're a nonprofit organization founded in 1972, and we serve as the sole national advocate devoted to the development of comprehensive policies and programs for individuals and families affected by problem gambling. And we're neutral on legalized gambling. We simply work to improve health and wellness by reducing the personal, social, and economic costs of problem gambling. We operate a 24/7, 365 gambling helpline, text and chat 1-800-GAMBLER. And because we're neutral on legalized gambling, we're not going to take a stance on whether the DC sports betting market should be opened up to multiple apps or whether it should continue to have one exclusive district-run app. However, we are going to take a position on the policies and legislation that directly impact and or assist those suffering from problem gambling. And I'd like to draw your attention to 2 issues with the current sports betting law that we believe must be improved upon in any future changes. First, I'd like to tell you that the district's ongoing failure to spend the funds that it currently has allocated for the research, prevention, and treatment of gambling addiction. When it first legalized sports wagering in 2018, the DC Council committed $200,000 a year to the Department of Behavioral Health for problem gambling. The law states that the first $200,000 in revenue from sports gambling must be used to fund programs through the Department of Behavioral Health to prevent, treat, and research gambling addiction. To date, none of that money has been Not creating programs to help those suffering from problem gambling has dire consequences. There are an estimated 7 million Americans living with gambling addiction. And statistically speaking, that leaves 15,000 residents of the District of Columbia that are currently struggling. These programs serve as a lifeline for individuals suffering. We know from operating our helpline that we received 3,623 calls in 2021. That's a 109% increase from 2020. We also know that those with gambling problems are at higher risk for suicide, drug, and alcohol dependency. District lives depend on there being assistance available when one develops a gambling addiction. Second, and I believe related to the first issue, the $200,000 is unfortunately not nearly enough to establish what is a comprehensive problem gambling program. I fear DBH has not been able to spend that $200,000 because it cannot find a vendor who could create an adequate program with such a small amount of money. We respectfully ask that this bill or any future version of it increase the amount currently allocated. As a 2021 survey points out, that DC ranks at 42 states with funded services at 40 cents, while the district's per capita public investment was a mere 30 cents. I do appreciate this opportunity to testify today. I'm happy to answer any and all questions that you may have.
And thank you for your testimony this morning. We're going to turn next to George Gilbert Jr. Good morning, Pastor. It's good to see you as always. You're here today with your affiliation with the Center for Racial Equity and Justice. You're going to have 3 minutes to provide your testimony. You can begin your testimony now. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I'm here representing the Center for Racial Equity and Justice, Missionary Baptist Ministers Conference of Washington, D.C., the Baptist Convention of Washington, D.C. and vicinity. And we all stand in solidarity against the Sports Wagering and Fair Competition Act. We believe that this bill must not move forward because there simply are two issues of protection that must be considered. The first concern that we have is expanding gambling in our city will have a tremendous impact on the backs of poor, underserved, and forgotten people. This bill is a clear and present danger to the hopes, dreams, and aspirations of the underserved, underrepresented, poor, and working poor residents of color in our great city. Our city, and in fact, the nation remains in the midst of a slow recovery from a pandemic that we must remind you disproportionately claimed the lives of the poorest residents in our city, and thousands of our collective parishioners have never recovered financially. In a city where there is no poor white community, we are experiencing historic, unprecedented rise in crime, food insecurity in deserts, suicide, teen drug abuse, lack of affordable housing, rising inflation, and a devastating and growing mental health crisis, all of which are inextricably entrenched in our Black and brown wards. Then that is experienced in our wealthier, this is not experienced in our wealthier communities. This proposed bill will exacerbate our problems. Expanding gambling essentially means to expand crime, addiction, and poverty. The second reason for not supporting this bill, and we say it's a protection issue, is because we must support and protect Black businesses in our city. Although as an ordained preacher, I do not support gambling in any way, I support Black businesses being elevated in our city. Our current contractor purposely goes through our government small and local business, CBE program, in which many contractors selected are African-American owned businesses and or hiring DC residents from our community. For example, Mark Jones, Kiana Folks, and Okra Stewart, who I am proud to say are all African-American business persons, or the Caesars establishment at the Capital One Arena, where they hire 2/3 of the workers are DC residents and people of color. And let us also acknowledge that when looking at the current leadership, Mr. Emmanuel Bailey, we see the only African-American within the entire country holding the position that he currently holds here in DC. And over the past 2 years, he and his team have received the distinguished award from the Department of Employment Services as the best business. We must protect Black power. Furthermore, although we can't track the money for the community from our government, we can track the charitable giving from Intralot under the direction of Mr. Bell.
Pastor Gilbert, if you could summarize your testimony, your
Yep.
time is expired.
All right. In closing, there is truly no need for much deliberation on this issue. As the gatekeepers of our city, I urge you to kill this bill, vote no, and protect our most vulnerable and Black business owners. As the Bible reminds us in Micah 6:8, the Lord requires you to do justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with God.
Thank you for your testimony this morning. We're going to turn to our fourth witness, Jeff Ifrah, with the Ifrah law firm. Good morning to you. Thanks for being here. If you can turn on your video and unmute yourself, you can begin your testimony.
Yes, sir. Thank you for having me this morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
Councilman and fellow council members, IFRA law is a CBE in the district, and as such, we were hoping to participate in the Class B component of the original legislation. We don't really have a position on this this current law that's being considered as an amendment, but what we would like is if the council could consider the problems that have prevented sports bars and restaurants in the district from applying for and receiving a Class B license. I think that before the council considers new licenses and competitors that would compete with those Class B licenses, perhaps it makes sense to look at the problems that have existed with Class B expansion. As you know, sir, there's only 1 or 2 Class Bs that are active right now in the district, and that's because the licensing process has been slowed to a halt. My group, BETDC, was formed over 4 years ago. We had the support of the then lottery director to go forward with almost 30 bars and restaurants. This is pre-COVID, 30 bars and restaurants to help make your Class B vision a reality. And Class Bs would mean that the betting activity would only occur inside the bar and restaurant and would be limited to the patrons of those bars and restaurants, which would help boost the food and beverage revenue for those bars and restaurants, but also create additional revenue from a share in the sports betting revenue that would occur inside those restaurants and bars exclusively. All of our bars received ABRA certification to go forward, but unfortunately, despite the fact that our group and our bars were promised licensing under the new leadership, that's changed, and roadblocks were created, which prevented the Class Bs who were members of BETDC from going forward. I think that those issues can be easily resolved with the council's help, and what that would mean is that these 30 bars and restaurants and more could generate revenue for the district in the form of licensing fees. The joint venture licensing fees are $25,000 per bar and restaurant. So the reality is that if these problems were worked out prior to further amendments to the bill being considered, an additional $1 million in license fees could be brought to the district rather quickly. The lottery and OLG have somewhat insisted on items that are not part of the statute and are not part of the original vision. And I feel like if we can overcome those minor roadblocks, we can get these Class Bs up and running rather quickly. We'd be happy to answer any questions relating to this issue, and also we'll submit written testimony before the deadline, sir.
And thank you for that. I appreciate that reminder as well. For those who have not yet and would like to submit written testimony to the committee, I would encourage them to do so they can be incorporated to the record for this hearing. Our next witness is Tori Keat. And good morning to you. You can begin your testimony. You have 3 minutes.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Tori Key, and I represent Owens Game Technology Corp as the U.S. Business Development Project Leader. We are a sports betting company with over 3 decades of sports betting industry experience, and we're also a licensed management service provider in the district, partnering with Grand Central, which is actually the first ever Class B location as a small business to launch a sports book in the U.S. Not only the district, so we're extremely proud of that location, as well as the DC and being trailblazers in having small businesses be a part of the sports betting industry. So I'll be brief because I know we don't have a lot of time today. I just want to address 2 main factors in opposition to this bill. But first, I want to quickly speak to the success that we're seeing at Grand Central and that we're hoping to see with our future joint ventures coming down the road. I'm here in DC, just quickly noting that Grand Central just this year alone has almost done 750,000 in GGR. So if you're looking at, and I know people referenced before me, COVID-19, the pandemic that was taking place, that was a huge factor in restaurants, bars, and other small businesses losing a significant amount of revenue. And we're seeing that this can be a massive ancillary product for the small businesses in the district. So with that being said, the 2 topics we wanted to quickly cover are actual district investment and the actual pool size of the handle in the district. And so on that first topic, district investment, as mentioned before by David Grohlman, we have a specific requirement as a MSP, as well as Class Bs and Class As, to spend 35% of our operator expense with a CBE, Certified Business Enterprise, so a small business. This is a massive investment in local businesses, whether they're minority-owned, woman-owned, or simply a small business. And we see this as a great, effective route for us to be able to give back to the community in the district area. So looking at this bill right now, on top of us creating jobs and so on for the district, we're not seeing these new mobile operators that are potentially coming in having this requirement, or simply contributing more to the actual local economy besides paying a simple gaming tax or a gaming license fee. So the second thing I want to cover very quickly here is the actual pool size of the handle. So the actual amount that's being bet in the district, because a lot of times I see the reference to Maryland. Once mobile was launched in Maryland, you saw a significant boost in the amount that was bet. Well, if you look at the district in Maryland, there are key differences. Maryland has a population of over 6 million people with a population density of roughly 600 people per square mile, which is quite the opposite of DC. DC has less than 800,000 residents, as well as almost 11,000 people per square mile. So if you're in Maryland and you're a sports bettor, typically on average, you had to travel well out of your way to place a wager, or you just simply waited for mobile to deploy. So in DC, that is not the case. We currently have a mobile solution that is district-wide. Granted, it has not been the best solution, and maybe we will look at potentially changing that vendor. But you also have Class B locations, you have lottery kiosks throughout the city, as well as Class A locations that are actually really convenient for the sports bettor. So we see this simply as mobile operators coming in and simply shuffling where the money is going, rather than a huge impact in the handle that would be actually being dispersed throughout the city. We don't actually see this as a significant spike in handle that would be coming into the city ultimately. So thank you for your time, Mr. McDuffie, and thank you all for your audience.
Thank you for your testimony this morning. I'll probably come back with a question with you and some other folks on the panel about the last point you made, Mr. Key, about just seeing it as if it were to open up to other mobile operators, sort of shuffling of the money, not necessarily increase to the handle. I'm curious as to how you might respond to a question about the different brands of mobile operators that are out there who, perhaps would attract more bets and therefore increase the handle generally in the District of Columbia, as opposed to just reshuffling the same amount of people who might otherwise use the Gambit app. So
Sure.
I'm just going to right now, just think about it. We got a number of witnesses we want to get to, but I want to just throw that out there right now, given what you testified to.
Okay.
All right, we're going to turn to our 6th witness, John Mandel, who is with the Sports Betting Alliance. Good morning to you. Thank you for being here. In your testimony, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chairperson McDuffie, members of the committee. for this opportunity to provide testimony in support of opening up the mobile sports wagering market vis-a-vis B24-1063. As the chair mentioned, my name is John Mandel, and I'm testifying today on behalf of the Sports Betting Alliance, which is comprised of many of the top operators in the mobile sports wagering industry: DraftKings, FanDuel, BetMGM, and Fanatics. Together, our members advocate for the establishment of a legal and regulated competitive mobile sports wagering market across the U.S. that protects consumers, stamps out the legal market, and provides revenue for the jurisdiction. I want to commend Councilmember Silverman, along with co-introducing council members Che, Allen, and Pinto, for putting forward a proposal that will bring district's legal and regulated mobile sports wagering market in line with the best performing frameworks from across the country. Opening DC sports wagering market will give access to additional sports wagering apps that district residents are clamoring for, and as a result, generate more revenue for DC. The timing could not be more critical. Maryland launched a competitive mobile sports wagering market last month, and within the first 4 days of operations, over 477,000 accounts were created and 16.5 million wagers were transacted with the 7 licensed operators. Virginia, which launched mobile sports wagering 8 months after DC, collected nearly $7 million in tax revenue from its 13 licensed operators for the month of October alone, a nearly 400% increase in year over year from what the Commonwealth generated from October 2021. DC residents continue to turn to neighboring states with top consumer choice brands to place mobile sports wagers. Even worse, a number of district consumers are likely still wagering in the illegal offshore online market without any consumer protections or responsible gaming measures in place. DC's mobile sports wagering market and its sports wagering market as a whole is an outlier. While 90% or more of the total amount wagered in most jurisdictions is done online, roughly 3/4 of all wagers placed in the district are done in person at privately operated sportsbooks year over year. This was even the case during the height of the pandemic. That's because DC residents and visitors overwhelmingly prefer the competitive odds and user friendliness of major legal and regulated sports wagering apps. As a result, Gambit only netted the district $2.7 million in its 3rd year of operations, although, as Councilmember Che mentioned, that was about 1/10 of what was originally forecasted. Combined with last year's $4 million deficit and the net transfer from the first fiscal year of operations, DC continues to be in the red for mobile sports wagering. The bill before you, however, would generate at a minimum $4 million alone from application fees, likely in year 1. To put that in perspective, that's more than what the district has generated from mobile sports wagering since it launched 2.5 years ago, excluding the deficit. The revenue from application fee is, of course, in addition to the tax revenue that will be generated from opening up the market, which, like Virginia and other similar markets, will continue to grow at a much more rapid rate than the district's stagnant mobile sports wagering market. I see that I'm past my time. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify.
And thank you for your testimony this morning. We're going to turn next to our 7th witness. That's Tina Harrison with Infinity Solutions. I see Tina Harrison's video. If you can, you're unmuted. If you can turn on the video.
Good morning. Good
Morning
morning.
to you. Thank you for being here. You're gonna have 3 minutes to testify. You can begin.
Yes. Good morning. It's a little sad for CBEs right now. And I wanted to testify this morning and talk to you about our success story. We provided the Infinity Solutions Inc. is a minority woman-owned business. I'm the vice president, and I am a licensed security compliance agent. We provide the district with a lot of first in technologies. And as CBEs, our relationship with Caesars is not just about the money, it's about the mentorship, the technology that we've learned, the administrative processes that we've learned. It's been a roadmap of success that's been laid out by the DSLBD office, who basically took our hand and applied principles that we utilize to be strong. I'm just going to rattle off a few examples. We're in the 5th stage of supporting Caesars at their level of support. We started out with the design of the surveillance systems and access control systems, electronic security. Then we provided them with the physical guard services, security monitoring. We reinvested in ourselves and our relationship and purchased server hardware and developed sports customized reporting systems to Caesar's need, and that met the OLG standards. This shouldn't be really reflected just on the app money that it brings in. Look at the experience of the CBE and where we are marketable for many other sports wagering businesses and concerns. Ours is technology based. We support Caesars not only in DC, we support 2 locations in Arizona. And even though we don't have some of our other CBEs that are here, look at the CBEs that create and print, that advertise, that are doing cleaning of facilities. We speak to our other CBEs. We're broadcast on the DSLBD videos. We talk to the other CBEs. We talk to them about the expansion of their business, getting clearances, going through background checks, allowing them to not only work in the district with companies like Caesars, but also making themselves marketable in the federal footprint. I'd like for you to consider what this bill does for the CBEs and not just look at the money, but look at the experience and our growth and the technology and what we can support with. I thank you for the time.
And thank you for your testimony this morning. We appreciate it. I'm going to turn next to our 8th witness, Okra Stewart with Potomac Supply Company. Good morning. You can begin your testimony. You're going to have. Moving along, we're going to turn next to Jesse Sittell, and if Mr. Stewart comes back on, we'll turn to him. Jesse Sittell with Unite Here, Local 23. Good morning to you. Thank you for being here. You can begin your testimony.
Great. Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to testify. My name is Jesse Sittell, and I'm a lead organizer with Unite Here, Local 23. Local 23 represents over 700 food service workers at the Capital One Arena. These workers do everything involving food service, from processing goods in the warehouse to running the busy concession stands to serving guests in the suites. Of these workers, over 2/3 are district residents and 95% are people of color. Starting in the spring of 2021, we began to represent workers at the Caesars Sportsbook. When the announcement was made that the sportsbook and its accompanying food service operation would open, we worked with Caesars and its subcontractor Aramark to begin bargaining a contract. At the end of this process, I'm proud to say that we had a collective bargaining agreement that affords workers a minimum wage of $20, quality and affordable union health insurance, a pension, and access to a union training fund where workers can improve their skills and seek promotions. Whereas many of our members at the Capital One Arena are seasonal part-time workers who have second jobs, the sportsbook has offered full-time, year-round employment. If sports betting were to expand, we are concerned that there would not be protections to make sure that these are also good jobs. Given the good jobs we have been able to create for district residents, I testify today to oppose the expansion of sports betting into other venues in Washington, D.C. Thank you for your time.
And thank you for your testimony. We appreciate it. We're going to turn next to Melvin Floreza, who is with Tacoma Station Tavern. And good morning to you. Thanks for being here this morning. You can begin your testimony. You have 3 minutes.
Good morning, Mr. McDuffie and members of the council. My name is Mel Floreza. I'm one of the owners of Tacoma Station Tavern, which is located in Washington, D.C. We've been in business for about 50 years. We contribute significantly to our local community and the arts community in the region. Additionally, we are one of the only handful of venues that provide live jazz music and other genres. Like many small business and restaurants in DC, the pandemic has most serious effect on our establishment. And for the first time, we're in danger of losing our business. We had to implement creative solutions to keep our employees working and our business opens. One of the solutions was to install Gambit DC. The installation of Gambit sports betting kiosks have tremendously positive effect on our profits. Further, we have been able to attract new customers as a result of Gambit, and DC Lottery provided all the equipment, internet connections, training, maintenance, and even purchased TVs to enhance our business, which us having to pay it. As you know, restaurants operate on now very narrow financial margins, and we would not have been able to install Gambit without the DC Lottery help. According to our agreement with the DC Lottery, we can earn 5% of the gross profits on every wager placed via the kiosk with no cost to us. In the restaurant business, pre-COVID, making 2 to 3% net profit for a small business was normal. Post-COVID, businesses like ours continue to struggle, and we need all the tools we can get to keep our employees working and operating, thriving. Prior to installing Gambit, we spoke with one larger national sports wagering firms, and it was very clear that our restaurant would not have made the same amount of gross profits we are making now. Congressman McDuffie, as a champion for small businesses through the city, please consider the benefits that businesses like mine receive as a result of Gambit's DC presence. I am concerned that the restriction or elimination of Gambit DC and the profit it generates us would jeopardize my business. In summary, you should know Gambit is working for small businesses and taxpayers in DC because of the platform. It's attracting customers and generating profits. If the sports wagering contract is altered, it could potentially open the door for large private investors to have citywide access with mobile apps, which would negatively impact the business that currently house the Gambit DC kiosks like mine. Thank you for the opportunity for me to testify, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
And thank you for providing that testimony this morning. We appreciate it. We're going to go back up to Okra Stewart. See, your video is now on. You can unmute yourself and begin your testimony. Good morning.
Good morning, Chairman McDuffie, members of the committee. My name is Okra Stewart. I'm the president and owner of Potomac Supply Company. I'm here to testify about my experience working with VSC and opportunities it has afforded me as a newly formed CBE in the District of Columbia. First of all, I'd like to thank the council members and DSOBD leadership who believed that CBE participation in sports gaming opportunity was paramount to create equity in an industry that has historically excluded small and minority businesses. In 2019, my company was selected by VSC, another CBE, to participate in the DC Lottery and Gaming contract as a subcontractor for 5 years. Emmanuel Bailey assisted me with establishing the necessary relationships with the major lithographic printing companies in the country to seamlessly provide secure thermal paper and lottery consumables for its 400+ retail vendors. Over the past 3 years, he and his team has provided me technical support, and our contribution has received positive performance reviews, ensuring contract continuity within the district and expanding Potomac Supply Company's footprint into other regions with VSC. Subsequently, I've been able to secure contracts with Caribbean Cage, Bob Johnson's company, and Bob Washington's, providing thermal rolls for gaming machines in 5 islands: St. Kitts and Nevis, Barbados, St. Martin, St. Lucia, Guyana. Additionally, we've secured contracts providing thermal rolls for kiosk and terminal machines for BetMGM for National Harbor and Nats Park. Furthermore, we're being vetted by Maryland Live Casino and Horseshoe Casino, which is now contingent on our M.MV certification, which we're expecting to receive as soon as tomorrow. If it was not for this contract with VSC and the leadership and assistance of Emmanuel Bailey, PSC would not be in the position we are today, having discussions of being the supplier for prominent lottery and gaming companies nationally and abroad. I just want to thank you for allowing me to testify, and I'm open to answer any questions if you have for me today.
Thank you for your testimony. We're going to turn to our next witness, and that's Gregory Caston. with Fish and Fire Food Group. Good morning to you. You can begin your testimony. Gregory Caston. I see the name on the screen. If you want to turn on your video.
How's that? Better?
Yep, we can hear you, and now we can see
There
you.
you go. I beg
Yep.
your pardon.
Good morning. You can begin your testimony. Thanks for being here this morning. You have 3 minutes.
Good morning, and thank you, council member and or chairman and fellow council members. I'm here to testify basically about my experiences with Gambit and a few observations I have. We have 4 kiosks located in 3 different businesses, 1 in Ward 5 and 2 in Ward 2. We have been on board since pretty close to the inception, one of the first 10 to get the Gambit. We find it to be a positive experience.
Mr. Caston, your video, I don't mean to interrupt, but your video went off. So yeah,
Yep.
it's back
Better?
on. Yep.
Sorry, I'm right here. We've had positive experiences with Gambit overall. In the beginning, it was a little bit rocky. People didn't really understand the app, but it has led to some substantial revenues for us with over, I think, $900,000 in bets and close to $100,000 or $75,000 actually in revenue for the 3 businesses combined. We are a little bit apprehensive that having other apps available will hurt the competition and hurt that revenue stream from us. And so we thought we would testify and bring that to the attention of this committee. We also wanted to, and I'll be very quick here, bring up 2 other issues that may or may not be addressed in this. One is the 2-block radius. One of my 4th restaurant is within, it's actually just outside of 2 physical blocks, but there's a technicality of one of the 4 sports stadiums that's dark, 70%, 80% of the year, and to preclude us from using the sports app during that time over the 2-block radius seemed unfair to us. And then also we are ultimately hoping to get a B license and to see if that B license might apply to all 4 of our locations under 1 license. And I wanted to bring those 2 issues up to the committee to consider along with their consideration for what they're doing now. My chief comment would be that adding the ability for any app to come in on top of anything would take away the distinction that my properties have in using the app that's exclusive to DC or being able to use another app outside of the DC app, but it would give me exclusivity of it. Thank you for allowing me to testify.
And thank you for your testimony this morning. I do not see our 12th witness on the witness list, Bata Tesfaye. I'll make the call for the name and I'll move on to our next witness, who is Brian Bassel, who's with Grand Central Station. Good morning to you. Thanks for being here. You can begin your testimony and you'll have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Chairman McDuffie and members of the Committee on Business and Economic Development. I'd like to thank you all for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Brian Vasile, and I'm the owner of Grand Central Restaurant, Bar, and Sportsbook located in Ward 1, and specifically 18th Street Northwest in Adams Morgan. We have been in business for 16 years, and Grand Central is fortunate enough to be the district's first and only Class B licensee, a badge we wear with honor and a tremendous amount of gratitude. I am in strong opposition to this bill. I will discuss the first and obvious topic, which is money. I understand Gambit has underperformed so far, and these new mobile apps are promising DC the world. But the vast majority of any income from these possible apps will go to Vegas or somewhere else, not stay here in the district. Sure, DC gets the 10% for tax or 15% in the proposed bill, but the rest is gone, and the vast majority is gone. And these comparisons to other states, Maryland, Virginia, are irrelevant and not apple-to-apple examples. That's plain statistics. It seems to be predatory, a move by these giants trying to take advantage of a perceived crack in DC sports wagering strategy. They're trying to make knee-jerk reactions to a new industry. This is a marathon, not a sprint. Overreaction is not necessary. Patience is paramount. This Class C license will have long-term effects on the backbone of this city, which is small business. A large part of the gratitude that I mentioned at the beginning of this testimony goes to this council, who approved and helped develop the existence of the Class B license when sports wagering came on the map in 2019. One of the things I respected most about DC and this council in regard to the creativity of the Class B license was their dedication to small business. DC made it a priority to allow small businesses like me and other folks you've heard from have the opportunity to gain access to a space usually reserved for corporate billionaire giants. This was visionary and pioneering, and I was motivated by that to become a pioneer myself. With the help of the OLG and many other government agencies, we were able to obtain the first ever Class B license, and we have been very successful to this point, with tax revenue, obviously employment being in the district, and our hashtag #BetLocal is real because that money stays here. This Class C license single-handedly destroys any progress the district has made in helping and giving hope to small business in DC when it comes to the sports wagering industry. This is a David versus Goliath situation, and the license gives David a nuclear weapon. This is obvious by the $1 million application fee, which no small business could ever afford, not to mention the obviously technical and software development startup costs. You know, I'm passionate about it because not having the giants in the mobile app space was a reason that I applied back in 2020 during COVID, when things looked very bleak for small businesses. And I thank you for your time, and I am strong opposition to this bill. Thank you.
And thank you for your testimony this morning. We appreciate you and all the witnesses providing their testimony. I've been joined by a couple of my colleagues, and I want to just do a check-in with the team before we go into rounds. We've got a number of witnesses here, and so I think if we could, team, let's do 7-minute round, and if we need to do another round, then we can do so. Actually, you know what? Let's do a round of 10 minutes for each of the members who are on, and they'd like to incorporate a brief opening into their round, and I'm happy to allow them to do so. I'm going to start off. If we could set the clock. I don't see Councilmember Che here any longer, and so let me go ahead and begin. I want to start with Jeff Ifrah. You had talked about some barriers to the existing sports wagering program and your ordeal in trying to get a Class B license. I heard something similar with Greg Caston's testimony, and so I want to give you an opportunity just to expound on that briefly so that is on the record if you'd like to do so.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for flagging that. So when the bars and restaurants first approached the lottery under the prior director, we had been told of a very specific process to go through, which, you know, granted took 2 years, and of course COVID slowed things down, but we emerged from that process of getting the joint venture agreement for the almost 30 bars approved. And what then happened was that new requirements from lottery began to be imposed on us. Two specifically, to answer your question, sir. One, there was a interpretation that lottery gave that said that the bars and restaurants could not form a joint venture if it was only for the purpose of bringing sports betting kiosks to those bars and restaurants. And so we addressed that by indicating that these businesses and the joint venture would actually do more than just put kiosks inside the bars and restaurants. They would also bring marketing relationships, media opportunities, cooperation with the DC sports teams. It's not clear if we satisfied them, but that's what we submitted. The second point was that the bars and restaurants needed to be 5% owners of the joint venture. That created complications because, and by the way, the bars and restaurants do not want to be 5% owners of the joint venture. They're just looking for as much revenue as possible. We offered to do 5% revenue. You heard testimony before from one of the bars, Tacoma Station, that that the lottery provides 5% gross revenue from their terminals. We offered to do that as a replacement, and the lottery said no, it has to be an ownership interest. It becomes very difficult to get 30 bars and restaurants.
Just to be clear, if I can jump in, this was the lottery saying this and not DSLBD?
Correct. DSLBD had tentatively approved our joint venture agreement. It took a lot of time, but back in October of 2020, I believe October of 2021, perhaps, it was ready to emerge from DSLBD when we were told that under the lottery's new director, the bars and restaurants needed to become 5% owners in the JV, not just receive 5% revenue.
What authority did they cite for that?
I'm not aware of what the authority was.
Okay, let me move to Greg Caston, if you're still with us. You had mentioned that you would like to pursue a Class B with the restaurants that you own. Are you aware of any obstacles to your pursuit of such a license for your establishments?
The only obstacle that I was making point of is I own multiple restaurants within the District of Columbia, and each would require an individual and specific B license, whereas as a group with common ownership, I was hopeful that one B license could apply and allow us to use all 4 of our restaurants as outlets for that same B license. We have chosen to use the Gambit kiosk to sort of learn the nuances before we venture into getting the B license. So I can't comment on the difficulty or complexity of the application process.
So you're not aware of whether or not you can pursue what you just articulated in terms of a single Class B license with your multiple facilities?
I was told I cannot do that. I have to have an individual license for each facility.
And you were told that by whom?
The lottery agency, I believe.
Got it. Okay. And then, Mr. Iffer, in your view, if you could speak to the actual proposed legislation before the committee today, how would that legislation impact the ability for small businesses and CBE participation in sports wagering in the District of Columbia?
Thank you. And just to follow on the heels of what Greg was just discussing, we did submit a letter to the lottery over 2.5 years ago. We never received a response, but we did ask. There is language in the statute that would permit a bar owner who has multiple bars to pay one license fee. We did explain that it would be exorbitant for small businesses when the bars are under common ownership. To have to pay multiple license fees makes it somewhat unprofitable to pay license fees for each establishment. We never received a response to that letter. To answer,
before you jump to the next part of this, but who benefits if the lottery, denies the ability for you all to move forward? Why would they not? If the idea is to increase revenues for the city, why would they not want to issue a Class B under the structure that you have put together?
well, I can't speak to their motivations, but I could tell you that they're obviously a competitor, and we had to submit a list of all our bars to the lottery. And after we did so, a lot of our bars were approached by the lottery saying, instead of using the BetDC kiosks from the CBE venture, why don't you use the lottery kiosks? And in fact, multiple bars that we had submitted now use the lottery's kiosks. So, it's sort of, it's an excellent organization, not suggesting anything foul, but the system has created an inherent competitiveness and tension between, the lottery serving as both the regulator and as a competitor.
Got it. Okay. Thank you for that.
In terms of the legislation and the question you asked,
Mm-hmm.
The problem, of course, and I think you've had two bar owners already discuss this, Grand Central and Tacoma Station, is that once a Class C mobile-wide licensee under the new law took effect, it would start competing with the captive audience that the bar has. The bar consumer and patron could then have on their phone, multiple mobile apps, and they may lose the the captiveness of that customer for their own app or their own kiosk or the lottery's kiosk. So, it creates more competition, and that may not be good for the bars and restaurants. I don't really have a position on the issue. The only thing, I'd like to say is I don't think that, as Brian said at Grand Central, he's the one and only Class B in the city. I don't think that we have fully given a chance to the Class Bs to thrive because of these impediments. And I would just, respectfully ask that perhaps we could look at that before we look at expansion.
Got it. Thank you for that. I'm going to turn to Mr. Mandel. In your testimony, you mentioned some of the numbers, I believe from Virginia. And correct me if I have this wrong, but you mentioned, I think, the number of 37.7 million in revenue from sports wagering during the period that covers, I believe it's DC's fiscal year, October 21 to September 2022. What does that amount actually represent? Was that the amount that was transferred to the state as a result of their sports betting program?
That's correct, council member. That is purely tax revenue.
Okay. And how many operators do they have in Virginia?
Currently, Virginia has 13 licensed operators. The law would permit up to 19 total, but currently 13 are licensed and live.
Okay. And do they have, what's the structure in Virginia? Do they have their, is it all private sports books in Virginia? Okay.
That's correct. It's a direct licensing framework.
Got it. One of the things that I want to ask, because I want to kind of hone in on the numbers, and I'll talk to Mr. Suarez about this when he comes up, but they'll talk about the amount of revenue that they pulled in and how it's gone up. Are you familiar with those numbers?
I am, Mr. Chair.
Okay, and what is the number? What's the increase been in revenues for Gambit?
So I believe the year-over-year handle is roughly 39% or so. And then what's not listed is, which, by the way, Mr. Chair, is significantly lower than jurisdictions like Virginia, which, by the way, launched 8 months later, which is a significant amount of time, to allow an industry to sort of mature, as folks on this call, on this hearing can agree. In places that launched, for example, Virginia, their year-over-year handle increase was 63%. States like Colorado and Illinois, which are sort of highlighted in the previous auditor's report, comparing just jurisdictions based on launch time, which is really important. Colorado saw a 59% year-over-year on handle increase. Illinois saw a 69% year-over-year increase, and that's based on the fiscal year calendar of the District of Columbia.
Okay, and my time is expired. I know we've been joined by both at-large Councilmember Alyssa Silverman as well as at-large Councilmember Christina Henderson. So I want to turn first to, I believe, Councilmember Silverman joined us first, and so we're going to turn to you for a 10-minute round. And good morning to you. Is Councilmember Silverman still on? Yeah, I do see her there. Are you there, Councilmember Silverman? All right, let's turn to Councilmember Henderson for a 10-minute round. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Councilmember McDuffie. I have had this on in the background listening in, so I appreciate all the public witnesses who are testifying today. I actually don't have any specific questions because I wasn't sitting here. I was listening, so I don't know exactly who said what. So my apologies on that front. But thank you for holding this hearing today.
And thank you for joining us. I'm going to try again with Councilmember Silverman before I proceed with my own questions. Okay, I'll assume that she will turn on her video when she's ready. Oh, there we go. Good morning. We're going to turn to you, Councilmember Silverman, for a round.
Henderson doesn't really have a. You know what? If you want to wait to come back. Good morning, Mr. McDuffie. I'll let you proceed. And then if you can turn back to me, I'd appreciate it.
We will do that. And I can't remember which witness it was who talked about just comparisons to other jurisdictions and the per capita. It might have been. Yes, Mr. Key.
Yeah.
I had posed a question to you before.
Sorry about that. What?
Councilman Silverman, yeah, you're muted. So Mr. Key, I had posed a question to you originally, and then I'm gonna probably have another question based on the per capita, but if you recall that question that I posed to you,
Sure,
if you can answer that now.
Yeah, I think it was in reference to my population statistics as well as the population density. So the reason I bring up the population conversation is because we constantly hear about Virginia. I heard Colorado, Illinois, Maryland, or these other states that have 5+ million people. So on top of that, their population density is relatively low. They're the large geographical states. So these states that have these retail locations are typically casino sportsbook operations that are not necessarily close to most sports bettors. So typically they have to go way out of their way, travel far to place a sports wager. So in the case of Maryland, for instance, you're going to see a significant increase in sports betting handle if you decide to deploy a mobile solution, because there are only a handful of retail operations. In the case of DC, DC is not even 10% of the population of Virginia. So if you take that into account, you're going to have a case of a high population density in DC where you already have retail locations throughout the city, whether it's lottery, Class B, or Class A's, but you also have a mobile district-wide solution. And we look at the numbers from the DC Lottery as far as Gambit Online. We've actually seen a peak recently in the month of November in the amount of handle, which it looked to be over 7 million from the DC Lottery's Gambit solution. And if you even go back to when it first opened up, when people had no idea what the reputation was of Gambit, they were clueless of it. They just wanted to play sports bets online. The handle was roughly 4 to 5 million. So if you look at those numbers and you see the recent peak, I'm just not seeing where the math is adding up to a huge spike in the handle just because you're adding more competition on the mobile side. If anything, you're going to shuffle around the money from the mobile side, and then you're also going to potentially cannibalize the small business market.
Would the small business market and the mobile not, perhaps see some challenges due to just the fact that Virginia and Maryland are offering opportunities to place bets where at first they didn't exist? So this sort of market advantage of being first to market that DC enjoyed, and having I think the significant challenges early on to deploying the mobile solution, have we not just gotten to the point where any advantage that would have existed no longer exists? And then you've got brands of these other solutions in Maryland and Virginia that just offer people who would like to gamble the opportunity to do so outside of the district.
I mean, it's certainly possible that you have had bettors going across state lines to place wagers with different sports books. That's certainly possible, but just looking at it from a statistical standpoint, there's nothing that indicates there would be a tremendous spike in the handle. It's just law of averages here. So, that's the point we're really trying to get across. I'm not saying the handle won't increase, but we're not going to see anything close to Maryland or we're referencing Virginia. Virginia doesn't even have retail, so we can't really do a true comparison. Or Colorado or Illinois. It's not an apples to apples case here.
Okay, I appreciate that. Let me ask Mr. Mandel. I think you referenced Colorado and Illinois, and you heard Ms. Key just mention it's not really an apples to apples comparison. What's the utility of mentioning those other jurisdictions if population density is different? than what we have in the District of Columbia? Why should the committee consider those other jurisdictions if they're unique and not similar to what exists here in the District of Columbia?
Well, it's a great question, and really three reasons. Number one, they are markets that launched at this roughly the same time as the District of Columbia launched Gambit DC. And, again, as folks had mentioned, it takes time for the market to mature. And therefore, when you line up markets where they're sort of launching at the same time, you can start to compare those numbers. And number two, I wasn't suggesting the revenue dollar figure would match up to the districts. I was making a percentage of year-over-year increase. So that sort of eliminates this sort of concern about the population difference. The fact that Illinois and Colorado increased, at these significant, almost double the numbers as mobile did from Gambit DC is, I think points to sort of how you can line them up and show that really the demand, which we're seeing from district residents going across state lines or, wagering with the sort of private operated sports books at the Class A stadiums, demonstrates why those numbers would also increase at a much more significant rate if the district had the same sort of apps that district residents are clamoring for.
Let me hone in on that. You said it would increase at a much more significant rate. According to data previously provided to the committee, I think it was on the roundtable earlier this year by OLG, if private operators were permitted to operate their own sports wagering apps and were taxed at 20%, which is higher than the 15% tax rate proposed in this bill before the committee, those operators would need to generate 300% more handle than what was achieved by Gambit DC in fiscal year 2022 in order to provide tax revenue equal to Gambit's tax transfer amount over the same time period. How do you respond to that?
So I think an important data point is looking at the actual gross gaming revenue and comparing it. So for example, we spoke earlier about how handle for Gambit DC increased by, I think, 38% year over year, but its actual gross gaming revenue only increased, I think, about 5% year over year. When you look at just Virginia's statistic on just the tax revenue from the month of October 2022, that jumped 400% year over year from October 2021, which is above this sort of, on the high end statistic of 350% and substantially higher than the 260% statistic that was previously mentioned.
What was Virginia's GGR you mentioned year over year?
I'll have to get the specific number, but the tax revenue from that figure was at least close to $7 million for that month.
Okay.
So,
okay. I see Mr. Key turned his video back on. Did you want to offer something based on the question I just asked?
Yeah, I just wanted to, in response to the most recent comment by Mr. Mandela, it seems that there's a notion that you can somehow control gross gaming revenue. Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, I mean, you could make a statement if you want, but I'm actually asking the question. So I might have a question based on what you offer, but I'm not sure I heard it the same way. If there's something you want to provide, you said you feel like there's a notion that mentioning that you can somehow control gross gaming revenue.
Yeah. So my point is the reason why we focus on the handle in this industry is because you cannot control gross gaming revenue. There's no way you could say we're going to guarantee 10% is being held for gross gaming revenue in the district or whatever jurisdiction. It's possible that the district could, in theory, go negative on a month. So the notion of using GGR as an indicator for this comparison, I think, is ill-advised.
Okay, got it. I appreciate that. Let me ask. I wanted to ask before a minute and a half left. There was a recent press release by the Office of Lottery and Gaming that stated that tax revenue from private operators in fiscal year 22 was down 33% from the previous year to $1.4 million, which is about half of what Gambit DC brought in over the same period. And that this is despite the opening of 2 additional privately operated sports books. Let me offer this to anybody who wants to chime in, but Mr. Key or Mr. Mandel, does that number sound accurate to you all? And if you all dispute that, is there any data that the committee should be looking at that would demonstrate some position contrary to that?
I believe that number is accurate in terms
Okay.
of comparing the tax revenue year over year. And I think that sort of speaks to sort of what consumers are looking for in the market and why we see Virginia's growth so significant and so many media reports of, consumers, crossing the bridge to wager, and certainly is a good sign of what's to come with Maryland Now Live with mobile.
Mr. Key, what are you seeing in terms of like what's happening in DC for the private operators? If that number is indeed accurate, that the FY22 revenues for the city were down 33%.
Well, I just want to go back to your statistic that you referenced, that 300%. Could you remind me of what the exact statistic was again?
Yeah, earlier I said, and this was based on testimony from Frank Suarez when we had a roundtable earlier this summer. And it was that if private operators were permitted to operate their own sports wagering apps and were taxed at 20%, which is higher than the 15% tax rate in this bill, those operators would need to generate 300% more handle than what was achieved by Gambit DC in fiscal year 2022 in order to provide tax revenue equal to Gambit's tax transfer amount over the same period of time.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Yeah, and that's also, I'm guessing there's an assumption on what the percentage hold would be to create, your gross gaming revenue, which then would actually contribute to the tax. So, and as I just mentioned, with the previous conversation with Mr. Mandel, there's no way we can control the gross gaming revenue. So it's possible that the district could have a negative month, as I just mentioned. So I think the key point is if we go back to that 300%, that's what we really need to focus on. Where is that 300% coming from? I keep referring to the population size here. It's not even a tenth of Virginia, and you're talking about these other states that have millions and millions of residents. Where is that 300% coming from?
And just even when you mention population, should we be looking at the total population, or should we be looking at like the population, gambling age population?
Well, yeah, that's when you actually get into the granular data, of course. Yeah, but I'm just saying, just from a pure volume standpoint, obviously, all 800,000 residents in DC are not better. So that once again even shrinks your pool down even more. While if you take that percentage that's in DC, let's say it's the exact percentage, same percentage of bettors in DC that there are in Virginia, that percentage of bettors is significantly more in a state like Virginia or anywhere else. So I just don't understand where that 300% handle is going to come from. There's just purely not enough people for that.
Got it. Okay, I appreciate that. I think I still have some more questions, so I'll probably do another round after I turn to Councilmember Silverman.
Thank you and good morning. My interest in sports betting and sports gambling is straightforward. I wanted to generate revenue for the district, for the important programs and services that do make a positive impact on our residents and businesses. It's a revenue generator. That is why I introduced this bill that we're discussing today. I appreciate a hearing being held on it. From a revenue standpoint, though, this current sports gambling program just stinks. Until 2024, at least, we're stuck with the Gambit app developed by Intralot under a 5-year no-bid contract that this DC Council should have never, ever approved. But now we're 2 years into it, and Gambit still has cost us more money than it has made. So I have to say that again, after 2.5 years, our city has lost money running a gambling monopoly. That was not the pitch made to me by our former CFO, our former lottery administrator, and my former colleagues who pushed for this, and present colleagues who pushed for this. From its inception in 2020 to the end of the fiscal year 2022, Gambit's costs have exceeded its revenues by about $1 million. Some people say, and we heard this in the last hearing, that Gambit is not as bad as it used to be. So, we should stay the course because things are improving. I disagree. In my 8 years in office, I have heard a lot of empty promises in this building. But it's hard for me to pick a more complete failure than this one. In 2022, transfers to the district's general fund totaled $2.7 million. That is 90% less than the annual revenue that former CFO Jeff DeWitt promised me when he pushed the sole source contract with Intralot back in 2018. And I'm not exaggerating. I actually have been cleaning out my office and I found this letter dated from 2018 from former lottery director, Beth Bresnahan. And this letter claimed the CFO had projected revenues, quote, conservatively, based on extensive research on sports gaming in the emerging US and established global markets. This building taught me long ago not to expect a sincere apology for serious mistakes. But even by the low standards observed around here, this just doesn't cut it. So today we will hear government testimony that shows why this bill, I believe, is necessary. Gambit can't be fixed. The district will correct the course on sports gambling and actually generate revenue only if the council requires it through legislation. Councilmember McDuffie, I don't have any questions for our public witnesses. I do have questions for our government witness. Thank you for giving me time to make my statement. I appreciate it.
And thank you for joining us. We'll turn to the government witness momentarily. I do want to ask Brianne Dora Schwall before we transition to the government witness. And I really appreciate your testimony. This is something that obviously was important to, I think, the bill when it was passed years ago, but it has not fulfilled its promise. How much, if you had to guess, or the jurisdictions we should be looking to as an example, where should we be looking, and how much might it cost to really implement a program that protects consumers and has strong protections in terms of gambling addiction and other concerns that exist but are not being addressed currently?
Thank you for the question. Currently, in the 2021 survey that I referenced, the District of Columbia ranks 21st of the 42 states that contribute any dollars to combating, researching, treating problem gambling. However, that assumption is made that you had expended the $200,000. So the truth is you probably equate to the other 9 jurisdictions in the US who have made no investment in this. Taking into account the historical negligence of this, we're advocating that you would consider something of around $1 per resident or $750,000 to be able to really research and invest in the creation of a program to address this issue. Certain jurisdictions, Virginia, for instance, your neighbor, invest 2.5% of GGR to addressing problem gambling. Other states like Michigan, for instance, did a flat contribution of $1 million annually from their revenue. So there are variances in approach, but I do believe that at this point in time, $1 roughly per resident would get you started in the right path.
Okay. And are you familiar with Maryland at all, if they're doing something similar?
Yeah, so Maryland has a treatment fund that was established prior to the legalization of sports wagering. Unfortunately, they did not make an additional contribution to problem gambling services when they expanded gambling within the state. We did air our concerns there. We do feel as though it will only be a matter of time before that gets revisited. Similar to Colorado and even Virginia, at the time of legalization, they didn't make enough considerations for this and have had to go back and since redo the law to increase the amount of recognition around this.
And do you think, at least where the district houses this money, these funds, and is should it be that problem gambling be addressed by the lottery or by the Department of Health or by some other agency within the District of Columbia's government? What are you seeing work in other places?
Yeah, so best practices when it comes to addressing problem gambling is a very bifurcated approach where you have the regulatory agency addressing things like responsible gaming and prevention programs administered through operations. But that needs to be done in tandem to experts within the addiction field. This is why it would be so important to increase the amount of money given to the Department of Behavioral Health so they can actually bring in and employ a full-time expert to work with the regulatory agency to deliver the most comprehensive problem gambling services.
Okay. I appreciate your testimony. Let me turn back to ask a question about, this was raised, and I can't remember exactly which witness, but this notion that this bill, if passed, would essentially permit the cannibalization of new entrants, large corporation of existing kiosks. And I want to see if any of the witnesses would like to address that concern that was raised by at least a couple of witnesses here today. Mr. Mandel, I see you turn your video on. Would you like to address that question?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. Kiosks and mobile sports wagering can thrive together. They really serve two different types of customers, and we see this time and time again when there were concerns that mobile sports wagering would have an impact on traditional lottery products. If you look at the data in New Jersey and Virginia and other jurisdictions, they actually both work well together, where you don't see a dip or you even see improvements in traditional lottery products unrelated to the adoption of mobile sports wagering. But it's because, you see different demographic data, you're serving two customers, one that is interested in using a mobile sports wagering app to wager, and a person who is more inclined to pick up sort of a sports wager through a kiosk system. So they can together thrive.
I appreciate that. And I see Mr. Vasile turned on your video. Would you like to offer something?
Yes, Chairman. I think in regards to Mr. Mandel's statement, you could probably ask any mall in America how they feel about Amazon and whether or not two customer bases can kind of function together and whether or not one cannibalizes the other, especially with small businesses versus Amazon. So just think about that in relative to giant corporations versus DC small business getting into the sports wagering space.
And then how was your experience at Grand Central obtaining a license and that process, if you could share?
Sure. Going through the process, I was on the radar back in 2019 and kind of following sports wagering. And the actual application process, it was tedious, but I mean, this is a strongly regulated industry that I was getting into. I was prepared for it. I was ready for it. OLG was transparent in helping me through the process. We knew that we were pioneers. I have a saying that pioneers get the arrows and settlers get the land. And, we're catching some arrows. We're going through this together. The district, all of us are kind of going through this together. So I think the process, being the first, I think we hit some hiccups, but we worked through it together. And, we applied in November and received the license in August. And I don't think that's a ridiculously absurd timeline for the regulatory and compliance issues at hand here.
And before I transition to a government witness, I wanted to ask about maybe Mr. Mandel may be able to speak to this, but what would a potential CBE component look like, if at all, for a Class C license in the District of Columbia?
Well, that's a great question, Mr. Chair. I think when we talk about opening up the market, we are talking about new opportunities. I think the distinction, as you know, between a mobile sports wagering app and a retail facility are, sort of the physical build out of a location, certain things that are tied to the physical location. However, some of the public witnesses have identified other soft costs, and, happy to sort of, work with sort of the operators to see what exactly that opportunity looks like. But to the extent we're creating new opportunities in the market, thus we are creating new opportunities for CBE participation as a result. But I can get you more specifics of what that actually looks like with the realistic situation of having a built out sort of mobile sports wagering app already.
I mean, it's always been a priority for this committee, and I pushed really hard for the implementing legislation to include a CBE component in it. And I'm going to look at, I'm looking at Tina Harrison, who perhaps would like to respond to that question I asked about CBE participation.
Thank you for Mr. McDuffie. The CBE participation in a mobile app is going to streamline the CBE opportunity just into the IT services. I'm not an official advocate for the CBEs, but I feel like I need to talk about other CBEs that have found revenue in the existing model. We don't want to eliminate them. They print, they clean, they advertise, they do a lot of different things. And I think that we can't just take this back from them. It's the opportunity and it's the essence of the federal SBA program, of the district DSLDB program.
Remind me, if you could, did you take a position on this bill, support or oppose?
To oppose.
Okay. All right. And I saw Melvin Flores turn on your video. Would you like to respond to the question I asked about CBE participation?
Yes. Well, I really feel that it would be detrimental to our business, and we would lose our customer base with the additional mobile apps. And I believe that the DC Lottery or the Gambit has been improving with their app, and it also helps us out a lot because we wouldn't have the multiple jurisdictions or the multiple apps that would hinder the customer to come and enjoy the atmosphere and of gambling with the
And just to remind me again, did you take a position on this bill? Did you support or oppose?
I do not support it. I do not support that.
Got it. And then my final question to Pastor Gilbert, just are there things that you think the committee should be mindful of or that this bill does or does not do in terms of your testimony this morning and concerns with consumer protection and resources for people struggling with gambling addiction? You still there, Pastor Gilbert? Okay, I don't have any additional questions, and I want to go ahead and turn to.
I am here, sir. I'm here.
Okay, did you want to respond to the question I just asked?
I didn't hear you. I'm sorry.
Okay, Did you have something that you wanted to offer in terms of what this bill does or does not do, or what the committee should be considering when we think about resources for individuals struggling with gambling addiction?
Yeah, so there was a great concern from the religious community that we don't have enough in place to make sure, especially with this bill, to ensure that our people are not targets, and that we need to be a responsible city. And those things just aren't in place now.
Did you have a position on this bill? Did you support
Yeah,
oppose the bill?
absolutely. Yes, absolutely. We are totally against this bill. We don't want to see it move forward.
Got it. Okay. All right. Well, I want to thank all the witnesses who testified this morning. We really appreciate you providing your testimony to the committee. Again, if you have not provided your testimony in writing, we would encourage you to do so. Please email the committee to provide that testimony. We're going to turn next to our government witness, Frank Suarez, who's Executive Director for the Office of Lottery and Gaming, who I believe has been with us the entire morning, listening hopefully to the testimony that was provided by public witnesses. Good morning to you. Thank you for being here. You can provide your testimony.
All right. Good morning, Chairman McDuffie and members of the Committee on Business and Economic Development. I am Frank Suarez, Executive Director of the Office of Lottery and Gaming, and I appreciate this opportunity to present testimony on Bill 24-1063, the Sports Wagering and Fair Competition Amendment Act of 2022. Joining me virtually today are my colleagues, Richley Bennett, Chief Counsel for OLG, Craig Lindsay, Agency Fiscal Officer, and Peter Alvarado, Director of Regulation and Oversight. Now, a key tenet of OLG's mission is to responsibly maximize revenue generation for the district. And as such, OLG believes that enacting this bill would significantly reduce the district's sports wagering revenue. It would place the overall annual revenue from OLG at risk, and it would negatively impact dozens of the city's small businesses. When the district's original sports wagering legislation was proposed, which was prior to the pandemic and with the best information available at the time, revenue projections made were significantly higher than what we now know can be expected from the district given the size of its population. But we were not alone in those optimistic projections. The New York Times recently completed an in-depth investigation into the proliferation of sports wagering in the United States. The Times reported that, quote, the gambling industry used dubious data to push to legalize sports betting, in part by predicting states would be greeted by gushers of new tax revenue. The Times analyzed the industry's claims and found that many of the projections, at least so far, have been wildly optimistic. The New York Times investigation substantiates statements that OLG has consistently made in past public testimonies regarding the inflated expectations that were placed on sports wagering in the district. Wildly optimistic projections provided by private operators have continued to perpetuate a false narrative that the district sports wagering program would generate more revenue by allowing private operators to obtain Class C licenses for mobile and online sports wagering across the district. In fiscal year 2022, Gambit DC, which is the OLG operated sportsbook, achieved a total handle of $58.3 million, which was a 38% year-over-year increase. This handle resulted in an estimated transfer to the district of $2.7 million. In contrast, private operators in the district grew at a much lower rate of 9% year over year and achieved a handle of $160 million. Now, although private operator handle was almost 3 times as large as Gambit DC, the tax revenue from private operators was $1.4 million. That was down 33% compared to the prior year and about half as much as Gambit DC transferred to the district. So private operators had almost 3 times the handle, but provided half of the revenue to the district when compared to Gambit DC. The bill proposes a 15% tax rate on gross gaming revenue, or GGR, which is total handle minus payout. This proposed rate is lower than the 20% tax rate currently allowed by district law if OLG were to open mobile and online sports wagering across the district to private operators. At the lower 15% tax rate, and assuming the fiscal year 2022 average payout from private operators of 91%, private operators would need to achieve a mobile and online handle of about $204 million in order to match the revenue transfer to the district by Gambit DC. That is now a 350% more than Gambit DC handle of $58.3 million. if the private operators were to provide the same $2.7 million in tax revenue from mobile and online as Gambit DC provided in total transfer to the district in fiscal year 2022. Now note that this scenario does not include the current Class A and Class B retail sportsbook operator tax revenue that would maintain a tax rate of 10%. This is specific to mobile and online sports wagering only, and again would require private operators to grow the Gambit DC handle in the district by 350% to ensure that the district breaks even on the proposed change. Even if we utilize the legally authorized 20% tax rate, private operators would still have to increase Gambit DC's district-wide handle by 260%. That is likely an insurmountable task for private operators, given the much lower 9% growth in handle that private operators attained in fiscal year 2022, and the increased competition and anticipated negative impact of Maryland's recent launch of mobile and online last month. Moreover, according to the New York Times, the gambling industry managed to scare state lawmakers into keeping tax rates low, in part by trotting out data about a sprawling underworld of illegal gambling. The Times found that those figures, which suggested that Americans were placing as much as $400 billion of illicit bets each year, were unreliable. One expert stated that the numbers pretty much pulled from the air. The current 33% decline in tax revenue from private operators illustrates how an increased reliance on privately operated sports wagering is also a riskier revenue stream for the district. While the Gambit DC model guarantees that the district will receive a minimum of 10% of handle before expenses, regardless of the payout of the sportsbook, private operators offer no guaranteed tax revenue. The bill will only require private operators to provide 15% of GGR. In highly competitive markets like the district, private operators are offering higher payouts to attract players from competitors, which has led to a much lower GGR and therefore lower tax revenue. Fiscal year 2022 illustrated the impact of this risk. Class A operator BetMGM failed to provide any tax revenue for the month of October 2021. Not only does the bill likely reduce the potential sports wagering revenue for the district, but it also puts the annual OLG revenue from both DC Lottery and Gambit DC at risk. The bill prevents OLG from extending its current contract with Intralot or from making any needed enhancements. The contract covers the general lottery in addition to sports wagering gaming systems and related services. This prohibition places over $40 million of annual lottery and sports wagering transfer at risk by leaving the district without a gaming system vendor if any of the following scenarios occur. If OLG receives no proposals to our competitive solicitation, if none of the bids received are satisfactory or cannot be accepted because of legal prohibitions, if OLG receives a protest that is pending before the Contracts Appeals Board, or the CAB issues a ruling requiring OLG to rebid the contract. Also, if the council does not approve a recommended contract or the new vendor is unable to timely convert to the new system, any one of these would leave the district without a vendor during the conversion process or any subsequent procurement process. The negative consequences of the bill go beyond OLG and the revenue to the district. It will also harm the 58 small businesses throughout the district that are current Gambit DC retailers, as well as others that would like to be part of the sports wagering industry, since Gambit DC offers small businesses in the district the lowest barrier of entry into sports wagering by providing all sports wagering equipment and fully operating the sportsbook. Gambit DC retailers earned more than $577,000 in commissions during fiscal year 2022. This revenue stream will be significantly reduced as small retailers will not be able to compete against the heavy advertising and promotions coming from private operators. The increased competition would also make it difficult for Gambit DC to provide resources for retailers, as the overall revenue will likely decline and make less funds available for marketing and promotions. Furthermore, the bill would grant an exclusive geofence for the premises of all Class B operators. The geolocation restrictions district players currently face with the Class A 2-block radius and the federal enclave exclusionary zones are already complicated for players and businesses to understand and manage. Adding additional exclusionary zones for Class B locations will further confuse and frustrate players. In addition, this provision provides no protection for Gambit DC retail locations and prioritizes Class B businesses over other small businesses that elected to offer sports wagering through Gambit DC, thereby giving Class B operators an unfair advantage. Under the current model, OLG can ensure that sports wagering across the district is done responsibly. The New York Times describes the sports wagering industry as an advertising free-for-all, in which gambling companies have carpeted social media, stadiums, billboards, and airwaves, with advertisements plugging their risk-free bets and other promotions. From January to October 2022, sports betting platforms bought more than $250 million of ads on national television, which is nearly 4 times what they spent in all of 2020. Private operators have been competing heavily to acquire players, and unlike lottery, sports wagering poses a higher risk of gambling addiction, particularly among younger adults. Studies show that constant aggressive advertising can have a negative impact on player health. Allowing the district to be saturated by private operators will put increasingly more district players at risk. In contrast to private operators, OLG's business model is responsible and does not support oversaturation from Gambit DC. Our core value of responsible growth as a public service-oriented government agency ensures that careful and responsible gaming supervised by OLG will continue to provide revenue growth while protecting players. Now, Gambit DC has experienced strong growth. Gambit DC has had more than 1.9 million wagers placed, equaling about $58.3 million in handle, which is an increase of 59% in wagers and 38% in handle compared to last fiscal year. This has been driven by OLG's ongoing implementation of product enhancements, which include increasing the Gambit DC payout to 90% and rapidly expanding retail locations to a current total of 58 licensed retailers. This October, Gambit DC launched a new mobile app with a significantly enhanced user experience that is more in line with what players experience when wagering with private operators. As previously stated, OLG has a mission to responsibly maximize revenue, and we are confident that maintaining a district operator sportsbook as the sole operator of mobile and online sports wagering accomplishes that mission. The proposed bill will have an adverse impact on the district's revenue, its players, and its small businesses. I look forward to the opportunity to ensure continued responsible growth of gaming revenue for the district. And in closing, Chairman McDuffie, I would like to thank you, the council, and the mayor for the continued support of the Office of Lottery and Gaming and for this opportunity today. This concludes my testimony, and I'm happy to answer any questions the committee may have.
And thank you for your testimony, Director Suarez. I do have some questions, and we'll do a 10-minute round. I'll note, just for planning purposes, we will have to take a break at 11 a.m. I'll do 7-minute rounds, so at least the two council members present, myself and Councilmember Silverman, can get around in before we break. And so I'll ask you to keep your answers concise. Let me start with the statement that you made just now in your testimony. Let me pull it up. It says, while the Gambit DC model guarantees that the district will receive a minimum of 10% of handle before expenses, regardless of the actual payout of the sports book, private operators offer no guaranteed tax revenue. I appreciate that statement because ultimately I think it does boil down to revenue and whether Gambit can produce the returns that have been forecast. And obviously I think you would agree it can't produce the returns as originally forecasted. But even with the amount that was of revenue that you saw previously, I don't think we got that guaranteed 10% rate of return that you just mentioned. So if indeed the city is guaranteed that 10% handle that you mentioned in your statement, why is it that the district didn't generate $4.2 million in tax revenue in terms of the transfer from Gambit DC for fiscal year 2021, when the handle from Gambit DC in that time period was $42,223,805.92?
Right. No, that's a very good question, Councilmember McDuffie. So what the guarantee is it guarantees that OLG will get 10% of the handle first before we have any expenses. And so that 10% is, like I said, it would be 10% of the 42 million in handle, and then we have to deduct any expenses that we would have for Gambit. And in FY21, the decision was made to really invest heavily in the brand and invest heavily in getting the brand off the ground. As you know, Gambit had no brand reputation prior to that. It was a brand new sportsbook. And so the organization really invested in the marketing and the branding behind that. And that's what drove us to the $4 million loss during that year. And so while we are guaranteed 10% of handle as our GGR, so for the example I'll give you is if for some reason Intralight is managing the sportsbook and they lose throughout the entire year, they still have to pay us 10% of handle. And then we have to subtract our costs from that to get to what the total revenue is.
Okay, and essentially, if you could remind everybody, what was the number that the city saw in terms of the transfer in fiscal year 2021?
21 was 0.
Okay. And what
From
was the
Gambit,
number
yeah.
in 19?
19, and my colleague Craig is here, but I believe it was a little bit over 300,000. Craig, do you have that exact number?
That's correct. 354,000.
Okay. And then in 2022?
2022 is 2.7 million.
Got it. And so since the inception of the program, how much has the city seen? Because in 18, what was the amount?
We were not live in 18.
Okay. So what has been the net transfer to the District of Columbia since the inception of the program to date?
I'd have to do, Craig, can you calculate that very quickly? I've not done that.
Good morning, Chairman McDuffie. It's a little bit over $3 million, $3,073,044.
And that's minus all the expenses?
That's correct.
All right, you said 3 million?
$3,073,044.
Got it. Okay. Let's talk about the federal regulation piece, which always comes up, that we're in a unique jurisdiction.
Yes.
People can't place bets in the federal enclave, et cetera, and it's been an impediment to the district's sports wagering revenues, as well as a reason why Gambit DC app experience has not been as user-friendly as I think perhaps people would like. Where does that prohibition come from, and is that prohibition still in place today?
Yes, I'm going to turn to Ridgely Bennett, who's our chief counselor, to sort of explain the details, but it is still there today.
Okay, and if you just mention your name for the record, Mr. Bennett.
Good morning. My name is Ridgely Bennett. I'm chief counsel at the Office of Lottery and Gaming. That law was actually put in place by Congress when the lottery charitable gaming statute was first implemented in 1983, and it's been in existence ever since.
Okay, and it's in existence in the code, the federal code, or is it in existence in some ongoing bill associated with the district's revenues and approval by Congress of the district's budget? Like, where exactly does it rest?
It exists in a federal law that's never been codified. It was the original budget bill when the lottery was passed, and I'd be happy to provide, and it was actually amended at one point in time to open up charitable gaming in other areas of the city. I'd be happy to provide the council with the exact sites.
Okay, I mean, I would love for you to do so.
Certainly.
Because I'm just sort of curious if it was in some original or some appropriations measure years ago, and consistently was a part of a federal appropriation of district dollars, then I'd love to know if it still exists today and is the same impediment today that it was when it was originally passed by Congress.
I'd be happy to provide you with the information. It was part of the original bill that funded the lottery. It was, as you know, budget bills generally expire at the end of the fiscal year. However, this was a substantive provision that lives on, and it shows it was lived on because it was amended later by Congress to open up charitable gaming in more parts of the city, in Old Georgetown and other parts. And I'll provide you with the exact sites of those.
Okay, that would be helpful to know. And if you could provide the committee what exactly would need to be, what would need to happen in Congress so that provision no longer provides an impediment if the district were to actively seek some change to it.
Certainly, there have been a couple of occasions where Congresswoman Norton has attempted to submit legislation to change that, but those have never passed. But
okay, let me turn to Councilmember Silverman for a 7-minute round before we recess. Councilmember Silverman, you're muted, Councilmember.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Mr. Suarez. I want to ask about your testimony. I hear you mentioned the New York Times story a lot. But the promotion of the sports gambling industry doesn't, or I guess I want to understand how that impacts our misjudging of our own sports gambling revenue. So the Office of the Chief Financial Officer told us in their estimates, and they said, you know, again, I was looking back at my archives, that their sports gambling estimates were the product of extensive research, both by the Office of Lottery and Gaming, your office, and by the CFO's Office of Revenue Analysis. And this was extensive research about the emerging market in the US and, you know, the sports game and the sports gaming industry. So help me understand why we were so off.
Yeah, good morning, Councilmember Silverman. I think that's a great question. And I think you have to remember this was done back in 2018. I believe at that point, there was only one jurisdiction outside of the traditional historical gambling jurisdictions of like Nevada and Atlantic City and places like that. I think it was New Jersey who had launched with only mobile. There may have been maybe one other jurisdiction, but it was all very new in its infancy. And you know, you can only use the data that you're given. And New Jersey only had mobile and then some retail in places like Atlantic City, compared to our jurisdiction, which is very unique, which is a very densely populated area. It's only 68 square miles. We're the only jurisdiction that launched with also having private operators competing within the same jurisdiction as a sole operator. Or a district operator, government operated. Also, we had the federal enclave, as well as the 2 block radiuses. So there's a lot of things that made us very unique that at that point, no one would know what the implications would be. And so I think that really drove a lot of those numbers up. And when I speak to sort of what is happening now with what the New York Times is speaking to, I'm actually referring to the continuation of the desire to go to private operators and continuing to be told that private operators and adding competition will drive up revenue. When the reality is, when you look at a per capita basis and the performance of all the mobile jurisdictions in the country, the best performing on per capita are sole operator jurisdictions. That would be New Hampshire and Rhode Island. And because we have this sort of combination of sole operator as well as the competition within, we actually outperform other jurisdictions that have our tax rate of 10%. We actually perform much better. We perform better on per capita than Virginia, who is at 15%. We are 42% better per capita than they are. So
okay,
there's this.
Can I stop you there,
perpetuated
Mr.
piece.
Suarez?
Yeah.
I'm
Sure.
sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but we only have a few minutes left.
Yes, no problem.
Okay, so we did this extensive research. The CFO retained an independent consultant who issued a report to the council saying that the way to go was this sole source approach. And what you're saying is those numbers were based on flawed estimates from other states. Here is my question.
What I'm saying is the best information that was available at that time. So
Okay.
now, if you look at the fiscal year estimate, the FIS original ones had us at about 29 million in 22, right? Because you were referring to that.
Yes, it was 29.
Maryland just launched.
30 million actually. in
Maryland just
2022.
launched, and Maryland says if they're lucky, ambitiously, they can get to 30 million. And Maryland is almost 9 times our size.
Here
So
is my
explain to me why
question,
we would
Mr.
go
Suarez.
back to
Why
those.
should
Yeah.
we trust any? How can you trust any numbers at this point? Why should we trust?
I would ask you the same question, Councilmember Silverman,
Okay.
if you're looking at any numbers from private operators, because you can't trust that. And if
Why
we're
not?
looking at, because they're inflated. If someone is telling you that a 15% tax rate, if you open up mobile, is going to generate more dollars for the district than what we have here. That is inflated, and that's what I'm telling you.
Okay.
The data doesn't support that.
If Gambit is such a strong program, then why can't it compete with the independent apps?
Because we don't have the
Wouldn't there be
advertising dollars that
Okay.
they do. We don't have the money behind national campaigns and big campaigns that they do,
Okay. Okay.
right?
So-
Because they're national organizations. They can spread their costs across the entire United States. We only have the district.
Okay, let me ask you this. It's my understanding that one other state chose our approach, Montana, in having a no bid contract, also with Intralot to run their sports gambling program. And like Gambit, the Sportsbet Montana app has been also roundly criticized by users and underperformed in terms of revenue. So given that we have an example of an underperforming.
Let's be clear, Councilmember Silverman, on Montana, it's a very different structure. So Montana, you can only bet at locations. You cannot, it's not across the entire state. So that performance would be lower.
Okay, so you're saying it's a different type of program?
It's a different situation than what you have here in the district.
Okay. I'll come back to you. I believe we have to interrupt the hearing for council business. Thank you, Mr. Suarez.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Silverman. Ms. Suarez, I'm gonna keep you here until I get word from staff that
sounds good.
They're actually ready for us. So I'm gonna, if we could, staff, just another 7-minute round.
Sure.
I want to just better make sure that we're working from the same point of reference here in terms of the per capita calculation.
Yes.
Why is it best to use per capita calculations in terms of comparisons on revenue generation on sports betting programs?
Yes.
Jurisdiction?
It's actually something in the gambling industry that's a best practice. Actually, even from the lottery's perspective, it's always, you always compare yourself per capita because each jurisdiction is different from the size of population. So you can't look at absolute numbers because a bigger population is obviously going to generate a lot more money. You have to look at how much does each person or per capita spend on gambling or spend on lottery to understand how are you performing compared to someone else.
And to understand that best practice, is the numbers that you all use in the industry uses for comparisons, is it the actual population of individuals or is it the individuals who are of gambling age?
If you can get the data from each jurisdiction where it breaks it down, gambling age, which it depends on the jurisdiction. So typically for lottery, it's a little bit easier because across the United States, it's 18 and above. The reason I use all population here for sports betting is that each jurisdiction is different. So some are 21 and above, some are 18 and above. And so to sort of get rid of all of that, it actually is a more conservative number if I use the entire population versus trying to say adult only, because the adult only is so different depending on the jurisdiction.
Okay, and what are the ages for DC, Maryland, and Virginia?
So I know for us, we're 18. Peter, is Peter on? I think he may know what the other two jurisdictions, I think they're 21. I think we're the only
That's correct.
jurisdiction that's 18.
Virginia and Maryland are 21.
Got it. So we actually have more people of gamble, not more people, but we have a lower age for legally participating in gambling.
That's correct.
In terms of the transfer, I think you all did a report that looked at OLG in a number of states.
Yes.
In terms of sports wagering revenue. And you looked at our fiscal year, was that?
Yes.
Was it
So in the written testimony,
Mhm.
there's also a chart with that. But
Fiscal
yes,
year 22?
fiscal year 22, yes.
Got it. Okay. And the amount was $2.47 per capita of sports wagering revenue?
No, it was $6.20.
Oh, $6.20. Okay. And when you all, in calculating that amount, are you looking at the entire revenue, all the revenue that was generated both by Gambit as well as the private operators?
Yes, so what I'm doing is comparing the model in the district and the revenue generated both from private and Gambit to say, how do we compare to all other jurisdictions in terms of their tax revenue?
I think there's been arguments today about witnesses that, including you, if you were to pass the bill as drafted,
right,
it would have negative impacts on the program as it's currently structured in District of Columbia, and would negatively impact the revenues generated by the District of Columbia for sports wagering. Is that your contention?
Yes.
Okay. When you look at the per capita revenues, if you were to compare DC with Virginia and Maryland on just the sports, the mobile applications, have you done any analysis to look at the revenues generated by the mobile applications? Because Virginia does not have a retail program, correct?
That's right. So I would not do that analysis because it's not an apples to apples comparison. Because Virginia doesn't have retail, there's nothing competing against their mobile. So there's nothing available in Virginia but mobile. Where here in the district, we have retail. And retail is a big component. As a matter of fact, retail handle is significantly more, right? So it would not be a fair apples to apples comparison.
So just for people who are at home watching, because they love to watch DC Council hearings.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're not, they don't gamble. And so, some of the jargon that is used is fairly esoteric in nature. How do you break down your case for why this bill would not be a benefit to the District of Columbia if the goal is to generate and drive revenues and growth in revenues?
Yes. Right. So one of the things that I sort of spoke to was how much handle, how much we get from private operators. So handle is the amount of wagers minus how much the operators or the company will pay out to players, right? So how much players win. So it's really what's left over. Well, handle is wagers, but the GGR
that's all total wagers is handle.
Yes, total wagers is handle. And then
gross gaming
GGR,
revenue.
right. Gross gaming revenue is handle minus the payout or the wins. So when we look at the district and we look at what we tax for private operators is on GGR. So that's not taxing them on what they sell in wagers. It's taxing them on what they basically have left over after they pay out all these winnings. So one of the problems is that the payouts are so high that
they fluctuate.
And it fluctuates, right?
Both the amounts of the handle as well as the payout.
Right. If one of the books or one of the sports books has a bad month, they pay nothing, right? They could pay zero in taxes. Where right now, the way our model is set up, we have a 10% guarantee on handle, not even GGR. We know we can get 10%. And then we can then figure out how do we manage our costs to make sure we stay profitable, which is what we've been doing since I got here. And that's why the 2022 transfer is 2.7 million. Now,
I think they said 3.7 million.
Well, that's total from 2019 to now.
So FY21 was 2.7 million, but just to make sure I understand, because I thought that there was a negative, I think 4 million was the number for FY20. Wouldn't that impact the overall transfer of this 3.7 number that Mr. Lindsay articulated?
Yeah, Craig, can you explain that?
Would that not be at least approximately a negative $250,000 for the overall program?
So actually, Chairman, if I can make the number is actually $3,073,044. That's not 3.7. Okay,
got it.
And then the second thing is we are a lapsing fund agency. So once our fiscal year closes, our fiscal year has closed.
What does that mean?
So that means that once fiscal year 21 is closed, that fiscal year has closed, and we start anew in 22.
Okay, but in terms of the overall
right, if you're looking
program revenues generation from the program since its inception,
Right.
Irrespective of what you just articulated in terms of the books being closed.
Sure.
There was 354,000 transferred in 2019, right?
Correct.
Okay. The program though in FY20
Correct.
was not in the black, correct? It was in the red.
Correct.
Okay. And it was in the red by what amount?
It's 2020. So the transfer years are 2020, 2021, and 2022.
Oh, got it. Okay.
Total program of inception is $3,073,044. If you look at the transfer in 21 of a little over less than $4 million deficit. So right now, if you're looking at the entire program, we're talking about a $1 million deficit for the program since its inception.
That's what, okay. All right. So $1 million deficit for the program since its inception. Let
Right.
me see if we could, if Councilmember Silverman is still here, if you'd like to, another round briefly before we have to recess. Okay, I'm gonna keep going.
Councilmember McDuffie, can I make one point about private operators and their net?
Sure.
So I just want to make sure we're comparing apples to apples. So
Okay.
we look at private operators and what they provided to the district since inception, and we take into account how much it costs for us to regulate them.
Okay.
And we take into account what they've paid in tax revenue and in license fees. We've netted out $131,944 in the district. And I would venture that if we took out the $200,000 that goes to the Department of Behavioral Health, we're negative.
So break that down for me. You
Yep.
said that is the total transfer minus something. So what was the total transfer? Of
Yeah,
private
so
operators
total
since
tax
inception?
revenue since inception for private operators is, and this is through fiscal year 22, so it doesn't include October and November. So through the end of the year fiscal 2022, it's 3.867 million, right? So 3.8 million,
Okay.
slightly a little bit more over than that. Then we had license fees collected of about 2.14. So the total tax revenue and license fees were about $6 million.
Okay.
And we took
What was the license fees? It was 2 point what?
2.14.
Okay, got it. Okay.
Yep. And so then we take our total expenses incurred by the district since inception of 5.879, so about almost 5.9 million. And we end up with $131,944. And I believe that's before we even deduct the 200,000 for DBH, for responsible gaming.
What is those expensive, what do they consist of? What's included in that?
Yeah, so that includes the team that has to go out and do the inspections and has to renew the licenses and regulate just in general. We do audits. There's a lot that goes into that. I think Peter, who's on, can actually give you more detail. It also includes the software and the maintenance that we have for licensing and case management. But Peter, can you elaborate?
But before you, well, go ahead. You let Peter elaborate. Go ahead.
Sure, as Frank indicated,
If you could just
my
mention
name is
your name
Peter
for the record.
Alvarado. Yeah, Peter Alvarado. I'm the Director of Regulation and Oversight. It does include the expenses related to continuous compliance. Aside from the initial licensing, we have to do audits of their programs, covering everything from responsible gambling, ensuring that they have a responsible gambling program that's compliant. We have to do the financial audits. We have to do audits of their anti-money laundering programs and audits of their internal controls. So those inspections and that. So it's a continuing process that we have for all the operators that we have to continuously do.
Do those expenses you just mentioned, are there similar expenses associated with Gambit DC and Interlot, that contract?
No, those not the same. Because of the nature of us being both a regulator and an operator, I have two staffs. One that's dedicated solely to the private operator side, and then we have our licensing of our Gambit side that has a different staff. It's different because certainly the DC government audits us, and so they sort of perform that regulatory function on our end on the on the gambit side and the lottery side. So the functions are performed differently.
Okay. And you said the DC government audits you. Who are you referring to specifically?
The audits are usually handled through my colleague Craig Lindsay, our agency fiscal officer. He can probably better explain what the audit process.
And so by DC government audits, you mean the Office of the Chief Financial Officer?
Yeah.
Hold on, Mr. Lindsay. Hold on, Mr. Lindsay. Mr. Alvarado, when you say the DC government audits you all as an operator, you're referring to the Office of the Chief Financial Officer?
I believe it is. I believe it is. I can't be certain. That's why I have to defer to my colleague.
Yeah.
So do you have a role in responding to that, or is somebody else within OLG who responds to those audits?
My colleague Craig Lindsay responds to those audits.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hold on, Mr. Lindsay. Let me ask this question to Mr. Alvarado. In terms of the costs associated with the private operators, the retail kiosks, the sports bars, where do those costs lay? Where are they included in?
I'm sorry, are you talking about the regulatory side of the private operators, the Class A licensing and the Class A, Class B?
Yes.
Yeah, that's my office. We handle the oversight of that and the audit and inspections of that part.
Got it. And so that's included in what you just said in terms of the cost that would come out of the $6 million total that Mr. Suarez has mentioned?
Yes.
Okay. Got it. Okay. Let me turn to Ms. Lindsay if you'd like to respond.
Yes, Chairman McDuffie, thanks. Yeah, just to clarify, so we're audited by several entities. The Office of the Integrity and Oversight, which is part of the OCFO office. However, the other audits that are conducted by external organizations. One being the DC auditor, as you're aware of, and then we have our independent CAFR or ACRA auditors, which are our independent auditors. And then I think on occasion, we will have audits conducted by the IG's office.
Okay, so give me the actual total contractor expenses that DC has incurred based on the contract.
Is that question for me?
It is for whomever Mr. Suarez would like to answer on his team.
Yeah, I'll let Craig answer that. I can find.
Okay,
so find it faster than I have.
Sure. So if you're asking for the contractors' fees for FY22, $3.1 million.
Overall,
and
so FY22 is $3.1 million.
Correct. And just to clarify, when we talk about contractors' fees, those are strictly the fees that are paid to the vendor for their percentage of share of the program.
Okay. All right. Yep. And what are those fees for the other years that the program is in operation?
For FY21, $3.2 million.
Okay.
And then $354,000 in FY20.
Got it. Okay. I'm going to have to recess here. I appreciate it. Ms. Suarez, we're going to be back. When I come back, I would say staff is going to have to remind me what time I said originally. I think we should try to, give me 1 second.
Yep, no problem.
Okay, we're going to recess until 12:15 p.m., so approximately an hour. I will see you then. Thank you thus far for your testimony and responses. The time is now 11:19 a.m. and this hearing will be recessed until 12:15 p.m. today. Sandra, if you want to just give me the okay, I will reconvene.
We are good to go once the government witnesses turn their cameras on.
Okay, I'll give them an opportunity while we do that. I'm going to just say good afternoon. I'm Kenyon McDuffie, Councilmember for Ward 5 and Chair of the Council's Committee on Business and Economic Development. Today is still Tuesday, December 13th, 2022, and we are reconvening this hearing virtually via Zoom. As was mentioned earlier, it's being streamed live on the council's website as well as at kenyonmcduffie.ward5.com/live. The time is 12:15 p.m. and I am calling to order this public hearing on Bill 24-1063, the Sports Wagering and Fair Competition Amendment Act of 2022. I want to acknowledge that we are still joined by at-large Councilmember Alyssa Silverman. I want to turn to her for a round of 7 minutes, and then I will conclude the hearing with a round of 7 minutes or so. Councilmember Silverman. Okay, give me a moment. I was told that she was joining us when we reconvene, so let's just give her a moment to join. Okay, I'll go ahead and do a round for now. I believe where I left off was on questions about the revenues that have been generated, but also asked about the expenses of administering the programs, both the one operated by private operators as well as Gambit DC as a contractor. And I'd like to get a little clarity around that. The expenses, if you can bifurcate them, I'd like to know how the expenses associated with administering Gambit DC compared to the expenses for the private operators, Class A's and B's. Do you all have that information in that way?
I think so. I think I want to make sure, Councilmember McDuffie, that I understand your exact question. We do have the information split out by what the expense is for. I mean, the expenses are going to be very different, right, compared to the two, because on the regulatory side, it's literally everything that we have to do to regulate the operators. And on the Gambit side, we're running a business and it's business expenses. So they are very different.
I guess I was just interested because, you know, when you all provided the numbers for the programs, you provided a number for the private operators of $131,944.
Right.
And it essentially was the $6 million in total revenues minus a bunch of expenses.
Right.
And I wanted to get as close as fair as possible with comparing that with the costs and expenses and fees associated with the Gambit contract to see, to the extent we can, get an apples to apples comparison.
Okay. Craig, I'll have to turn to Craig, and he can probably walk you through the exact numbers
Okay.
on the Gambit DC costs by year. And then they're broken out by different, right? So there's marketing costs, and then there's the contractor fees. And so Craig can provide that detail for you.
Okay.
Right. So good afternoon again. This is Craig Lindsay, the AFO for OLG. So the total expenses in total, that's FY20 to 22 cumulatively for Gambit has been $15.6 million. And that's inclusive of several different items. The retailer commissions are included in there, marketing and advertising costs, electronic transaction costs that goes with players being able to make wagers electronically. And then the last component is the contractor's fee. And then of course the major expense, which aren't included in the operational expenses, but the payout also would be an expense to the program. So in total, we're talking about $15.6 million.
Okay. That's helpful to know. I appreciate it. All right, let me now ask, so the DC code, I think it's at 36-621.11 sub A2. It says that OLG may offer a mobile or online sports wagering product either by taxing mobile and online licensed retailers at 20% without limit to the number of licenses issued, or through a contract with a limited number of partners, which can be shown to return the most revenue to the district, close quote. Now, it says that mobile and online licensed retailers, if they were permitted to offer mobile sports wagering, should be taxed at 20%. This legislation before us would tax online or mobile retailers at 15%. I just wanted to get your thoughts on that tax transfer rate and its potential to bring in revenue to the District of Columbia based on some of the things you mentioned in your testimony about essentially, well, I won't characterize it. Let me just let you respond to the question.
Yes, no, that's a great question. So yes, we currently are able to do a 20% tax rate if we were to open it up to private operators across the district. That's correct, that's in the bill. And that would be based on our belief that would generate more revenue than what the model is currently doing with us as a sole operator. We do not believe that's going to do that. And that's why we've not chosen to open it up. The bill actually takes it down to 15%. And that was one of the things that I wanted to make sure we called out in the testimony, is that we're actually discounting the tax rate in this bill to private operators, which would make it even harder for the private operators to basically break even if we open it up. Because as I said in my testimony, it's a 350% lift that they have to do on handle compared to what Gambit's handle is, to equate to the same 2.7 million in tax revenue if you do the 15% tax rate. And also, go ahead. No, I was going to say, just to throw out the assumption, that's assuming the standard payout that private operators have had in the district of 91%.
And assuming that it was opened up to additional private mobile operators, do you see a pathway where they could achieve that 300+%?
No, I don't believe that's necessarily possible. I mean, you can never say nothing's possible, but I believe it's very difficult. Private operators in the district last year only grew 9%. Gambit grew 38% in handle. And so I think it's very difficult to imagine that they could actually, do that high degree of growth. Not to mention, they would be a little bit later in the game, so they're competing against Maryland's opening. So we don't know the impact of that yet. We haven't seen an impact on Gambit yet from Maryland, but we don't know in the long term what that impact will be. So I think it's a very big challenge for private operators to achieve that. They haven't been able to grow that fast here in the last year. And so I just don't see how that would be an easy task for them.
My time has expired. I'm going to turn to Councilmember Silverman for a round.
Great, thank you. Mr. Suarez, I want to pick up actually where Mr. McDuffie left off. Help me understand how DC Lottery's approach to sports gambling can be successful, given the reality of what you told me in the last round and what all of us see when we watch sports, that the private apps are spending billions, probably, to advertise and attract customers. So both of our neighbors, as you have mentioned, Maryland and Virginia, have implemented a sports betting model with competition among these privately owned mobile apps that are spending millions, possibly billions on, maybe millions on advertising. And then the private apps compete with each other to offer the best experience to customers. And it doesn't matter to us, this is like the purest model of competition, right? Because we don't care if Caesars and MGM keep refining their apps to attract customers. What we care about is that 15% gross gambling revenue tax that we get, right? So we let the private app, so in Maryland and Virginia, they're letting the private apps fight it out. They're collecting the revenue generated. They don't care really who has the best app, and these companies will be probably be refining continuously to attract customers because they want to maximize their revenue. But we have a very different model, right? Even though we're going to be competing for the same customers in our jurisdiction, because what I remember from my discussions with Ms. Bresnahan and former CFO DeWitt, first it was based on something that isn't true for us anymore, right? That we have a tremendous daytime population that will, gamble with Gambit. And because of COVID, work from home culture, that has changed. And as well, I've heard from a lot of DC residents that they, are saying, okay, well, when I go to Virginia, I go to Arlington to do an errand, I place all my bets. So given that the district is such a small jurisdiction, and it is so easy to travel to our neighbors who have a competitive private app model, how does Gambit make money? That's really my final question. I just don't understand, given, we don't have first mover advantage anymore. That was what Mr. DeWitt kept telling me why we needed to move quickly on this, because we wanted to establish a habit of commuters from Maryland and Virginia gambling on our app. And then they would get, it's like why people buy Charmin. You connect with a brand, the app, and that was going to be the success of Gambit as it was sold to me, or not sold because I didn't vote for this scheme. But we don't have first mover advantage. There is, as you noted, and the New York Times story noted, the gambling industry is going to spend millions to try to attract customers. You don't have that advertising budget. So I just say, how is this going to succeed? I just don't understand it. I have to say, it just doesn't seem logical to me. We're going to be outspent in terms of advertising. We're not going to have the what do you call it? Constant revision. We don't have the money. We're not going to have the money to keep improving the app continuously, like the private companies do. Research and develop. We're not going to have the research and development budget. So it seems like we're just going to get out competed, and I'll stop there.
Okay. Yeah, no, good question, because I think it's really important to clarify. And the reason that Gambit is going to do better and the model is going to do better is because you have to look at the numbers. So let me go back to the points that you have brought up.
Okay.
One is we've got all the border jurisdictions that are competing against us, and that is true, and that will continue to do that. And I know you were told commuters, and we were going to have Maryland and Virginia, but remember that was when we actually had commuters. We no longer have that. So
Right.
Let's take that off, because that's not something that we can count on anymore.
Exactly.
The private operators can compete and they can do all of the advertising they want to do, but within the district, we are the sole operator and we get a higher share of revenue. So they can increase their ads, they can do as much as they want to, but I want to remind you, as I continue to say, they have to do 350% of what Gambit is doing in handle to get to the same transfer. Because of your 15% tax rate that is low, that is what they have to do. And so please keep in mind that is not going to work, right?
So
well,
your
I would like
numbers,
to have an opportunity to address it.
I only have 50 more seconds.
Same here.
We're on a clock,
Okay.
unfortunately. So I don't mean to be rude. I just want to
Yeah.
make the point that I can't tell you, I have hundreds of emails, hundreds from bettors, DC residents who bet, who tell me they're frustrated with the Gambit app. They find the private apps much easier to use. And the reality of our jurisdiction is that people travel throughout Maryland, Virginia, and the district. And I hear what you're saying, that we can generate more revenue with less betting. But the fact of the matter is there's just much more betting happening in Maryland and Virginia because, I guess you might not believe these folks who are writing to me, but they say that they are, will make their bets when they're in Maryland and Virginia to use Caesars, MGM, DraftKings, and I hear what you're saying, but it is contradicted by what users, what I would say were potential users of Gambit, who all tell me they do not use our app because of its clunkiness, inefficiencies, and they just prefer the private market apps. Perhaps they're persuaded by the relentless advertising that, is unavoidable when you watch sports. But they are persuaded, the consumer. I guess what I'm trying to get at, and I'm over time, I apologize to you and Councilmember McDuffie, but the users, the people who are going to place bets, money, and that would generate revenue for our city, they are telling us, I had someone stop me on the street about this. They just aren't using Gambit. And given, again, that we don't, as you have admitted, we don't have the advertising budget, we don't have the research and development to constantly improve the apps to compete with the private market apps. I will concede your point that our model can generate more money for less, I guess, gross gambling revenue and users. But we're losing the user. We're not going to get the gross gambling revenue and customers, I guess they're customers, because the app our model can't compete given that the situation has changed. We didn't get first mover advantage. We never created a habit. And now the daytime population of our city is a lot different because of work from home culture. And the federal government coming back to work and so forth, other things the city is going to wrestle with. But here's the thing, I feel like we still have this fixed It's like we don't want to. I am been told a lot lately that I just need to accept and adapt. And I feel like with Gambit, we're not accepting that situation has changed, and we're not adapting to try to maximize our revenue given that the conditions and fact pattern has changed. I'll stop there because I'm way over time.
Chairman McDuffie, am I allowed to respond?
Go ahead, you can respond.
Yes. So, Councilmember Silverman, I want to make sure this is clear because you keep stating that we're doing this with less revenue. And what I'm telling you is that we're not doing this with less revenue. If you adopt the model that you are recommending, that will be less revenue. You also call out about having less money for research and development. That was never stated. That is not true. The company Intralot is responsible for that, and they have funds that they dedicate to that, and they've continuously continued to invest in the product, and we continue to make the product enhancements as we go. So that is not one of the issues that we have. I want to just be clear, I'm a public servant of the district. My goal is to maximize revenue. And there's a balance between what we hear from consumers and from players and their dislike of an app. I'm sure you are getting hundreds of emails. I'm not getting hundreds of emails, but maybe you're getting the hundreds of emails, and we have to be careful that we just look at that and don't understand what is causing those emails. We have a lot of things within the district that make the app very difficult. We talked about the exclusionary zones, and that adds to a lot of that frustration and that confusion. So we have to dig into the data. But what I want to make sure is clear is that the model you're proposing will not raise revenue, and no matter how many different ways you look at it, it's not a better model than what we currently have.
And it won't, I'm sorry, Councilmember McDuffie.
No, please go ahead. I'm going to take another
question?
round, but I'll allow you to respond to that before.
I appreciate that. And it won't generate revenue. Why?
Because it's not likely that private operators can handle 350% to get even close to the number that we have now. The other piece too is, remember, you're going to impact small businesses, and that is also a big issue that we don't want to have when we open this up.
In that if we go to the private app approach, the retail, there will not be a reason for customers to bet at the retail establishments. That's your argument?
I think that you will have a lot more competition for retailers to have to deal with versus going to a retail establishment. Yes.
So I appreciate the extra time. Thank you, Councilmember McDuffie. I think we're going to just agree to disagree, Mr. Suarez. I will be following the sports gambling program, and we will have to see. I think the good thing is there's going to be empirical data here. Yes. We will see how successful Maryland and Virginia's program is, and we'll see how successful our program is in another year.
Well, we're already more successful than Virginia, so I'm not sure. From a per capita perspective, our tax revenue is higher than theirs, 42% higher. So I'm not sure what you're measuring, Councilman. What about? I really want to make sure it's clear. I'm giving you facts, and I'm not hearing facts from your side that are saying that that's a better model. No one's given us numbers that say we're going to get to this number if we open it up, because it doesn't exist.
And this is what I'll say, Mr. Suarez, is I believe Maryland's program just started.
It did.
In another year, I look forward to this hearing and seeing how Gambit has competed with Maryland and Virginia. And we'll see. And, if you are right, give me a call and I'll tell you you're right.
I will do that.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Councilmember
Silverman. Just a couple of questions before, if the staff can give me 1 7-minute round. I probably won't use all of it if we get succinct answers. I want to talk about Gambit DC and the app. It's my understanding that they recently launched a series of updates. And so I want you to talk through briefly what those updates include, whether they were updates to all the platforms, Apple, Android, etc., when they were launched, and have you had the opportunity to look at whether there's been any customer feedback since the launch of those updates, and what that customer feedback, if any, has included?
Yes. No, great question. So we did launch in October 24th. I believe we launched a brand new interface across the mobile app and as well as the kiosks at retail. And that was both apps, Android and Apple. And we added the ability to log in with biometrics. We have a much easier navigation, and that is much more similar to what you see from our competitors in terms of the private operators and the apps that you'll see in both Virginia and Maryland. We also increased our deposit limits to make it easier and some other functionality at retail with vouchers. So we have significantly enhanced the user interface that players have when they use the app. And we are seeing a lot of positive momentum there. Our ratings have gone up from where they were before for the app. And so we believe it's really making a great difference. And, the other thing I also want to make sure to call out is the numbers show that players are using the app and they are using Gambit and they are not going across the border for every wager. I think we have to be careful when we have a small sample of what's happening and assuming that that's everyone. We actually can show by the numbers that people are using the app and that we continue to grow and more people are using it.
You talked about with Councilmember Silverman, research and development. How much went into developing this new app? What kind of?
I don't have the numbers. We can always follow up with Intralot to understand the numbers, but I do believe there was a lot of expense into the entire revamping of the app. And we can follow up and tell you sort of what the true costs and sort of what was invested into that from an Intralot perspective. But there is a lot of research of, talking to players and understanding what they need and all the feedback that we've received. But then there's also looking at what the competitors offer and say, what are the things that people like from those apps? And how do we incorporate those best practices into ours as well? And so all of that went into the development of the new interface.
Have you looked at the ratings of competitor mobile apps versus what the rating of Gambit is?
I have. I think they're pretty strong on the competitor side. They're usually, 4 and above.
And what is Gambit's?
And Gambit's right now, since launch, is 3.7.
Okay, and when you say since launch, that is a distinction between where it was originally. So you're saying the feedback that you've gotten, the customer ratings since October 24th, was it?
Yes.
All right.
Well, we launched October 24th. The ratings are a little bit after that, but yes.
What are the ratings, the 3.7? When did those begin? What's the time frame that you're using?
I think it's November, the first week of November. Because we had to reset them to be able to monitor what the ratings are on the new change versus the old one.
Okay, and so the new ratings are 3.7.
Yes.
And so you all have control over resetting that?
Yeah, they let you, well, not on Android, but on the Apple side, you can reset them to, if you make enough of an update, then you can reset those. So that way you're measuring.
And they determine whether you made enough in an update?
I'm not sure that they determine it. I think you can reset it as long as you've made an update to the app. But we have never reset them until we made the complete change.
And what was the rating prior to the launch of the on the first week of November?
I believe it's 1.5.
Okay. And have you all analyzed, and I know, I guess it's still early because it's only been a little more than a month, but I'm curious as whether there's been any analysis of the feedback you've gotten since you relaunched.
Yes. Yes, we're looking at the feedback. It's a little limited. There's not a lot of detail in there. I think we've gotten a lot of positive comments in terms of the new interface and liking that. We've gotten some of the same comments from before the app change in terms of people just complaining about the app in general and saying they want private operators. We get a lot of that kind of feedback sometimes in there. But for the most part, there's not been anything too specific to a function or anything other than just the change in an interface being easier to navigate.
On the contract with Intralot, what does it entail? It's not just sports betting, correct?
Yeah, so our contract, and that's a great question. Right now, the contract is for all of lottery. So the gaming system that they provide for DC Lottery, for iLottery as well, so online lottery, and sports wagering. And so the bill as is written currently would put all of that at risk because it keeps us from extending the contract, which includes everything.
Got it. And how much revenue is generated by the other components, iLottery and DC Lottery?
Yeah, so total for lottery typically is around 40 million or more in transfer that comes just from lottery. And then, sports betting would be on top of that.
And does the lottery include both the DC Lottery and the iLottery?
Yes.
Online? Okay.
Yeah, both together.
Okay. Got it. And I want to ask about some of we had a couple witnesses, both Pastor Gilbert as well as Brian Dora-Schwal testified about problem gambling. And if I recall correctly, during your confirmation hearing, you discussed your experience with programs to address problem gambling.
Yeah.
And in light of those concerns, I think you were listening, at least you were on when public witnesses were testifying. Can you talk about what in particular the district has available in terms of resources? And I'd love to hear from you, your estimation. I know the funds lie with DC Health, but what should the city be doing in this arena? It sounds like we're not doing nearly as much as we should. I believe witness testified that we ranked 21st, and that's just based on the funding that we had allocated, not that we spent a dime of it.
Yeah, no, I think, as you said, I have quite a bit of experience in responsible gaming where I came before coming to the district. It's a really important part of gaming for me, and I take it very seriously, and not just on the treatment, but really on the prevention and what are the things that we do to prevent. And the lottery has done quite a bit of work to do that. We have hired a responsible gaming specialist who the focus is literally on what are responsible gaming programs, how do we continue to improve those, how do we make sure the ones that we have are effective. We have a licensing process that includes looking at operators, responsible gaming programs. So if we're thinking about private operators, how are they implementing responsible gaming within their facilities and through their programs? We do on-site inspections of the facilities as well to ensure that they're complying with our RG rules. We have within our system, both online, there are tools that players can take advantage of that will limit their losses, that will tell them how much time they've been on. Lots of tools to sort of help them manage their play and help them make sure they're not playing too much. And if a player does feel like maybe they might have an issue, we have a pamphlet and we have resources and with the National Council on Problem Gambling that they can call and get additional help. We also have a self-exclusion program that players can go online now and actually self-exclude from playing. And what that does is once they self-exclude, even if they are playing because we didn't catch it, they can't claim their winnings. So it's an incentive for them to sort of self-monitor and self-regulate. And I'm really excited because we're actually going to have the National Council on Problem Gambling Conference here in DC in 2023. And we really look forward to partnering with that organization and seeing what else we can add to the program that we have here currently at the lottery.
So separate from what is in DOH's budget, how much do you all have allocated specifically within the lottery's budget to address responsible gaming?
It's a good question. I think we'd have to total that up. Craig, I don't think we have that number right away, do we? I feel like we may have to quantify that.
I'm sorry, my camera is taking a minute to come on. Yeah, we don't have that number right away. However, what I can say is I believe we are members of that organization. So some of the things that they do, we us being members, we're awarded some of the things that they put out to help those who may have addiction to gambling. So
If there's a specific number you could give me, I would love for you
Get
to
that.
circle back with the committee to provide that to us.
We can do that.
Okay. I do not have any additional questions at this time. Is there anything else that you'd like to add to the record before we adjourn this afternoon?
Yeah, no, first of all, thank you again for the opportunity. I think it's really important that we take a look at all the components in the bill. In my written testimony, I've also addressed a few other things that I hope the committee will take a look at. I just want to reiterate, because I don't think we maybe have addressed this as much today, but we did see a lot of great testimony from our small businesses here in the district. And I want to make sure that we continue to consider that as we look at changes to the sports wagering model and how that impacts CBEs and small businesses here in the district, because this really can have a negative impact on them. And I want to make sure we keep that in mind. But overall, again, thank you for the opportunity to testify. And again, if you have any other questions, please let me know. We have a couple follow-ups. We will make sure to get back to you quickly.
Okay. Thank you and your team. I also want to thank all the public witnesses who provided testimony here today to the committee, and those who did not have an opportunity to do so, who would like to provide testimony. They can provide that testimony to the committee, and the record stays open until noon on December 16th. The time is now 12:51 p.m. and this hearing is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.